Hi everyone, welcome to the Ricktopus channel. I hope you're all doing well. Today, we'll be looking at 2 hours of depressing Rick Sanchez lore to fall asleep to. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free, and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. Section 1. The smartest man in the multiverse is also the saddest. And yes, that's the point. Let's establish what we're working with, because Rick Sanchez might be the most paradoxical character in modern animation. This is a man, and I use man loosely, given the cybernetic enhancements, the clone bodies, and that one time he was a pickle who has achieved what philosophers and scientists have been chasing since humanity first looked up at the stars and thought, what if I could go there and also commit light terrorism? Rick Sanchez can do anything, travel anywhere, create life, destroy gods, manipulate the fundamental forces of reality, like their settings on a microwave. He's built entire civilizations inside car batteries, escaped maximum security prisons by possessing alien bodies like he's playing a very unethical game of musical chairs, and once won a music competition that saved Earth from total destruction by basically freestyling about how much he wants to party. The man has a portal gun. The portal gun. A device that makes every science fiction invention ever conceived look like a participation trophy from a middle school science fair. Want to visit a dimension where pizza orders humans? Done. Need to escape from literally any situation ever? Point. Shoot. Problem solved. Rick Sanchez has, through sheer intellect and what can only be described as weaponized spite, achieved a level of freedom that most people can only dream about while stuck in traffic or sitting through meetings that absolutely could have been emails. And yet, this interdimensional God King spends most of his time drunk in a garage in suburban America, alienating his family members, one passive-aggressive comment at a time, and carrying around enough emotional baggage to fill every overhead compartment on every plane in every dimension simultaneously. Rick Sanchez. The smartest being in infinite universes, within a certain subset of those universes, but we'll get to that particular existential nightmare later, is also categorically, demonstrably, almost impressively miserable. We're talking about a character whose catchphrase, "Wubba lubba dub dub," was eventually revealed to mean, "I am in great pain, please help me," in his best friend's native language. The show literally told us in Season 1 that every time Rick said his fun catchphrase, he was screaming for help, and we all just thought it was a silly noise. In our defense, it is a silly noise. The writers knew exactly what they were doing. This creates what I like to call the Rick Sanchez paradox, which sounds like it should be a physics term and frankly deserves to be one. Here's the setup. Infinite capability meets infinite sadness. Total freedom meets total isolation. The ability to solve any problem in the universe meets the complete inability to solve the one problem that actually matters himself. Think about it like this. You know that friend who peaked in high school? The one who still brings up that one touchdown or that one party? Or that one time they almost talked to their crush at prom? The one who achieved something once and has been spiritually coasting ever since? Rick Sanchez is that energy, except the peak is godlike scientific achievement, and the coasting is drinking himself into oblivion while burning every meaningful relationship he's ever had. We all have that friend. Some of us are actively becoming that friend. This video may or may not be a coping mechanism for that realization. What makes Rick compelling, though, goes beyond the standard sad genius archetype we've seen a million times before. Walter White was a sad genius. House was a sad genius. Every detective in every British crime drama who stares moodily out of rain-streaked windows while solving murders is a sad genius. The trope is so established that it has its own Wikipedia page and probably its own support group. Rick Sanchez takes that archetype and cranks it up to a scale that becomes philosophically interesting. When you're the smartest person in your city, you can feel isolated. When you're the smartest person in your country, you can feel misunderstood. When you're the smartest person in your universe, you can feel alone. When you're the smartest person in infinite universes, when you've literally walled off a section of the multiverse specifically to guarantee that you'll always be the most important person in any reality you visit, isolation stops being a feeling and starts being a fundamental law of your existence. Rick built himself a prison made of supremacy, and then he locked himself inside it. That's the show. That's the whole show. Everything else is window dressing. Very entertaining window dressing. The Pickle Rick episode won an Emmy, and honestly, it deserved it. That action sequence went harder than most actual action movies. Now, here's where I should probably address the elephant in the room, which in this case is less an elephant and more a collective acknowledgement of what we're all doing here. We are about to spend approximately 2 hours engaging in detailed psychological analysis of a fictional character. We're going to examine his traumas, dissect his relationships, trace the through line of his emotional development across multiple seasons of television, and probably have feelings about it. This is happening. We're doing this. And you know what? That's fine. That's more than fine. Because the dirty secret of storytelling, the thing that every English professor knows and every I only watch documentaries person refuses to admit, is that fiction matters. The emotional truths embedded in fictional characters can hit harder than any biography, because fiction is designed to hit hard. Rick and Morty specifically has been carefully constructed to make you feel things about a cartoon alcoholic, and the fact that it works is a testament to good writing, good voice acting, and the universal human experience of watching someone make the same mistakes over and over while thinking, please just go to therapy. Rick does eventually go to therapy, by the way, multiple times. It helps exactly as much as you'd expect it to help someone who can invent his way out of any problem, except the ones that actually require personal growth. Which is to say, it helps a little, briefly, before he finds a way to avoid dealing with the underlying issues again. So let's establish the thesis of this video, the central argument around which the next 2 hours will orbit like moons around a planet made entirely of sadness and sci-fi references. Rick Sanchez's intelligence is the source of his misery. His genius is the thing slowly killing him emotionally, spiritually, and occasionally literally when his coping mechanisms catch up with him. Every invention, every dimension-hopping escape, every clever solution to every impossible problem is simultaneously a monument to his capability and a gravestone for his happiness. He's so smart that he can see through everything, which means nothing has meaning. He's so capable that he can escape anything, which means nothing has stakes. He's so powerful that he can replace anything, which means nothing has value. And the real kicker? He knows all of this. He's aware of exactly what's happening to him, exactly why he's miserable, and exactly what he would need to do to fix it. The answers are right there, staring him in his sad, droopy, perpetually hungover face. Go to therapy consistently. Stop drinking. Actually engage with your family, instead of treating them like NPCs in the video game of your life. Be vulnerable. Accept that you can't control everything. Let people in. Easy, right? Simple stuff. The kind of advice you'd find in any self-help book, in any airport, bookstore, in any dimension. Except Rick Sanchez would rather turn himself into a pickle and fight through a Russian prison than do any of that. He would rather build elaborate death traps while blackout drunk than sit in a room and talk about his feelings. He would rather construct a device that lets his grandson experience and then lose the love of his life, all to win an argument about a fake vat of acid, than admit he was wrong about something minor. That's the tragedy. The capability is there, the knowledge is there. The intelligence that could solve literally any other problem in the multiverse is right there, available, fully operational, and it does nothing. Because intelligence alone was never the thing Rick needed. What he needs requires something his genius actively prevents him from accessing. The willingness to be ordinary, to be vulnerable, to be present in ways that don't involve scientific achievement or interdimensional adventure. Rick Sanchez can outsmart gods. He just can't figure out how to show up for his family without a punchline attached. Over the next 2 hours, we're going to trace this thesis through the show's emotional landmarks. We'll start at the origin point, the day everything broke, and follow the fallout through abandoned universes, suicide attempts, existential crises, petty revenge schemes, and the occasional therapeutic breakthrough that gives us hope before the status quo reasserts itself like the narrative equivalent of an immune system rejecting a transplant. This is going to be a journey through grief, abandonment, toxic coping mechanisms, rare moments of genuine connection, and the philosophical implications of infinite choice leading to paralysis rather than freedom. Light stuff. Casual viewing. Perfect for falling asleep to, assuming your dreams are already populated by questions about determinism and the nature of meaningful existence. So get comfortable. adjust your pillow. Maybe grab a glass of water, because self-care is important even when you're watching content about a character who treats self-care like a war crime. We're going to watch the smartest man in infinite realities fail to solve the one equation that actually matters. And maybe, just maybe, we're going to recognize something familiar in that failure. Something that hits a little too close to 3 a.m. thoughts about our own choices, our own avoidances, our own tendency to overthink our way into paralysis rather than feel our way through discomfort. Section 2. The origin, the Rickshank Rickdemption, and the death of everything that mattered. Season 3, Episode 1. The episode that broke the internet, crashed McDonald's corporate servers, and taught an entire generation that Szechuan sauce was apparently worth committing minor crimes over. We'll get to that. The sauce thing. It's relevant, somehow, to the emotional devastation we're about to discuss. Bear with me. After an agonizing wait between seasons during which Adult Swim decided to drop the premiere on April Fool's Day because apparently the network is run by chaos, Agents fans finally got answers to the question that had been haunting. How does Rick escape from galactic prison? The answer, as it turns out, involves a brainalyzer, a fabricated origin story, a virus hidden inside fake portal gun schematics, and enough body hopping to make Freaky Friday look like amateur hour. The plot mechanics are classic Rick. Outsmart everyone, manipulate every system, emerge victorious while leaving a trail of institutional collapse in your wake. Standard Tuesday stuff for a man who treats galactic governments like inconvenient traffic laws. The Galactic Federation crumbles. The Citadel of Ricks gets teleported into hostile space. Jerry gets divorced. Everyone's currency becomes worthless. Rick declares himself the de facto patriarch of the family and the universe in the same breath. Business as usual, really. Except for one scene, one memory, one moment that changes everything we thought we knew about Rick Sanchez, delivered in between jokes about McDonald's promotional tie-ins and sight gags about interdimensional bureaucracy. The scene plays out like this. Cornelius Daniel, the insectoid interrogator assigned to extract Rick's portal gun formula, convinces Rick to visit the memory of inventing interdimensional travel. Rick agrees, seemingly defeated by the threat of his brain liquefying. They travel through Rick's mindscape past his memory of 9/11, where he's apparently ranting about civil liberties, which tracks, past his favorite sports bloopers, past a shadowy female figure that Daniel correctly identifies as someone important, and then we arrive at the memory itself. Young Rick Blue Pants, less world-weary, recognizably the same person but without the accumulated damage of decades, stands in his garage. A portal opens. Another Rick steps through, offering technology, power, the ability to become the infinite Rick, a god. Young Rick passes. Sounds lonely, he says, looking at the version of himself who chose differently. A different kind of Rick, I guess. The other Rick leaves, insulted and ominous. Diane enters Rick's wife, a character we've never seen before, whose existence has only been hinted at in throwaway lines and one photograph. She asks about the sci-fi noises. Rick tells her he's done with science, that her suggestion to get ice cream with Beth is the last great idea that will ever be had in this garage. Then a portal opens. A small sphere falls through. Rick screams. The explosion kills Diane and Beth instantly. And Rick, our Rick. The Rick watching this memory with Cornelius Daniel delivers a line that recontextualizes everything. That's the 3 lines of math that separates my life as a man from my life as an unfeeling ghost. Now, here's where things get deliciously complicated, because this is Rick and Morty, and nothing is ever straightforward. The memory is fake. Rick explicitly tells Cornelius Daniel that the entire origin story was totally fabricated, a trap designed to upload a virus into the brainalyzer. The portal gun formula the Federation received was worthless. The whole thing was an elaborate con, Rick playing the role of vulnerable prisoner while actually orchestrating his escape. Classic Rick. Never trust a memory, especially when it's being shown to an enemy. Except Rick Mirai Jack in Season 5 confirms the memory was real. The broad strokes, anyway. Rick Prime, the version of Rick who came through that portal, did kill Diane and Beth. Rick C-137 did invent the portal gun out of grief and rage. The revenge quest that defined decades of his life? Real. The trauma that turned a different kind of Rick into the nihilistic alcoholic we know? Real. The show spent 2 years letting audiences debate whether Rick's tragic backstory was genuine or just another manipulation, then confirmed the darkest interpretation was true all along, which is either brilliant long-form storytelling or deeply cruel to anyone who was hoping Rick was just being dramatic. He was being dramatic. He was also telling the truth. Rick contains multitudes, and most of them are sad. So let's talk about what this origin actually means, because the implications are staggering. Rick Sanchez, the man who treats the multiverse like his personal playground, who dismisses emotional attachment as weakness, who claims nothing matters because everything is replaceable, that Rick started as someone who chose family over godhood. When offered infinite power and infinite versions of himself to party with, young Rick said no. He wanted ice cream with his wife and daughter. He wanted to be ordinary. The portal gun, the device that defines Rick's existence, the technology that makes him the most dangerous. Being in countless realities, he invented it to find his family's killer. The greatest scientific achievement in the multiverse was born from grief and the desperate need for revenge. Rick became a god because someone murdered the only things that made him want to stay human. That's not a superhero origin story. That's a tragedy wearing a lab coat. And here's the part that really twists the knife. Rick failed. For decades, he hunted Rick Prime across infinite realities. He killed countless versions of himself. He became so dangerous that other Ricks banded together and surrendered to him, founding the Citadel under his supervision just to make him stop. He created the central finite curve, sealing off a section of the multiverse where he would always be the smartest being, presumably to narrow his search. None of it worked. Rick Prime was too slippery, too clever, too willing to abandon everything and everyone to avoid consequences. The man who murdered Diane and Beth walked free for years, while Rick drowned his failure in alcohol and nihilism. The tragedy isn't that Rick lost his family. Lots of characters lose their families. The tragedy is that Rick had a choice: revenge or moving on, and he chose revenge. And it cost him everything, and it didn't even work. He sacrificed decades of potential happiness, alienated everyone who tried to get close to him, and built an empire of bitterness and isolation, all for a goal he couldn't achieve. When Rick finally does kill Rick Prime in Season 7's Unmortrican, the victory is hollow. There's no satisfaction, no closure, no moment of triumph. Just a broken man beating his nemesis to death and then sitting in the aftermath, covered in blood, unsure what to do with a life that no longer has a purpose. The origin story in the Rickshank Redemption sets all of this up, even if audiences didn't fully understand it at the time. The fabricated memory contains enough emotional truth that it resonates, and the eventual confirmation that it was real transforms Rick from a mysterious anti-hero into something more specific and more painful, a grieving husband and father who never figured out how to grieve. The Szechuan sauce bit, by the way, is doing more work than it initially appears. Yes, it became a meme. Yes, it caused actual chaos at McDonald's locations across the country when the company did a limited promotion and severely underestimated demand. Yes, Rick's declaration that his one-armed man is a discontinued dipping sauce seems like a joke designed to undercut the emotional weight of everything that came before. That's the point. Rick deflects. That's his primary coping mechanism. When things get too real, when the pain gets too close to the surface, he pivots to absurdity. The Szechuan sauce rant isn't random. It's Rick doing exactly what he always does when confronted with genuine emotion. I'm not driven by avenging my dead family, Morty. That was fake. Except it wasn't fake, and Rick knows it. And Morty knows something is wrong, even if he can't articulate what. The episode ends with Rick declaring himself the patriarch, threatening Morty into compliance, and ranting about dipping sauce for 97 more years. It's funny. It's uncomfortable. It's a man who just relived the worst moment of his life, even if he framed it as fake, desperately trying to regain control by being the loudest, most chaotic presence in the room. This is ground zero. Everything that happens after this episode, every toxic relationship, every alcoholic spiral, every moment where Rick pushes people away or refuses to engage emotionally, traces back to a garage, a portal, and a bomb that took 2 seconds to destroy a life that took years to build. Rick Sanchez became the smartest man in the multiverse because someone killed his family, and he couldn't figure out how to live with that. He built an empire of science and chaos because standing still meant feeling something, and feeling something meant acknowledging that Diane and Beth were gone and nothing would bring them back. The unfeeling ghost line is Rick's own diagnosis. He knows what happened to him. He knows when he stopped being a person and started being whatever he is now. The self-awareness doesn't help, if anything. It makes things worse, because Rick can analyze his own dysfunction with perfect clarity and still choose to perpetuate it. That's the origin. A man who wanted to be ordinary, who chose family over power, who had that choice ripped away from him by a version of himself that made the opposite call. Everything, Rick, is now the drinking, the detachment, the casual cruelty. The desperate need to be the smartest person in every room exists because of what he lost and how he chose to respond to losing it. The saddest part? There were other options. Other Ricks lost their families too. Some of them moved on, found new purposes, built different lives. Rick C-137 is notable specifically because he couldn't let go, because he dedicated everything to a revenge quest that consumed him without ever providing resolution. He had a choice. He made it. And now he's here, 70-something years old or 50-something or 80-something, the show can't decide, surrounded by a family that isn't technically his, drinking himself to death in a garage that probably reminds him every single day of the one where everything went wrong. The most anticipated season premiere in the show's history opened with Rick escaping prison, toppling governments, and declaring total victory. It also opened with the revelation that the smartest man in the multiverse is running from a memory he can't outrun, no matter how many dimensions he escapes to. Section 3. The abandonment Rick's missing years, and why Beth has every right to be unhinged. Let's talk about Fruppyland. Season 3, Episode 9, The ABCs of Beth. An episode that starts with a news report about a child murderer getting executed and somehow goes downhill from there, emotionally speaking. Beth casually mentions that the killer's victim was her childhood best friend Tommy, and that she coped with his disappearance by telling herself he'd gotten lost in her make-believe world. Rick, overhearing this, gets visibly uncomfortable, which is notable because Rick getting visibly uncomfortable about anything requires either imminent death or the exposure of something he'd rather keep buried. The man has faced down galactic governments, alien gods, and infinite versions of himself trying to kill him, and he barely flinches. But mention Fruppyland in front of Beth, and suddenly, he's very interested in changing the subject. Turns out Fruppyland wasn't make-believe. Rick built it. An entire pocket dimension, procedurally generated clouds and rainbow rivers and bouncy ground, all designed to be completely child-proof. A world where nothing could hurt little Beth, where she could play safely while her father did. Whatever Rick does, science, drinking, avoiding the emotional labor of actually raising a child. Interdimensional arms dealing. If we're being chronologically accurate about his activities during this period, I collapsed a quantum tesseract. Rick starts to explain before Beth cuts him off with the only question that matters. Dad, I don't care how you made it. I want to know if Tommy's still in there. Tommy is, in fact, still in there. Sort of. He's been surviving for decades by having sex with Fruppyland creatures, producing hybrid offspring, and eating them. An endless cycle of incest and cannibalism. Exactly as horrifying as that sounds. And the show plays it mostly for dark comedy because Rick and Morty has a very specific relationship with trauma. The punchline is that Tommy has become a god king to a medieval society of his least delicious children. Because of course he has. This show refuses to let anything be simply tragic when it can also be deeply, disturbingly absurd. The Tommy situation is grotesque, but it's also a distraction from the real horror of this episode. The slow-motion revelation of exactly how Rick parented Beth. Here's what we learn across the episode. Through dialogue and flashback, and the particular way Beth's voice cracks when she's trying to sound angry instead of hurt, Rick made Fruppyland because he couldn't be bothered to watch his daughter himself. A whole dimension, infinite resources, reality-bending technology, all deployed in service of, I'm busy, go play in your pocket universe. Other dads hire babysitters. Rick created a parallel dimension and called it love. The sheer scale of effort involved makes it worse somehow. He clearly cared enough to build something elaborate, but caring enough to actually be present? That was apparently too much to ask. He also made her weapons. A lot of weapons. The show lists them. a sentient switchblade, a pink ray gun with a bow on it, a bless your heart curse that causes the victim's heart to grow until it crushes their other organs, something called a quick-acting freeze dart, something else called a liquefy ray. These are gifts Rick gave to a child, his child, a little girl who apparently asked for these things, and whose father, instead of maybe wondering why his daughter wanted tools of violence, just built them for her because it was easier than having a conversation about feelings. The episode frames this as evidence of Beth's darkness, her buried sociopathy, the parts of herself she inherited from Rick and never fully processed. Fair enough. Beth did some horrible things in Fruppyland, things she blocked out, things that directly led to Tommy's imprisonment in a nightmare dimension. Here's the thing the episode doesn't say out loud though. Every single one of those weapons was made by Rick. Every dark impulse Beth acted on was enabled, facilitated, literally manufactured by her father. He didn't teach her empathy or consequences or how to process difficult emotions. He gave her a liquefy ray and a pocket dimension with no adult supervision, and then acted surprised when things went wrong. A child asked for weapons, and Rick's response was, "Sure, here you go," rather than, "Let's talk about why you want these." "I could have been the one who starved to death in here," Beth says. After learning that the world Rick built for her was genuinely dangerous once the rules got broken. "What if I'd gotten hurt?" Rick's response is to sarcastically pretend to commit suicide, bouncing off the child-proof ground, dunking his head in the breathable water. The bit is funny. Rick being performatively dramatic to avoid engaging with valid criticism is a well-established character beat, but watch Beth's face during the scene. She's used to this. She's been watching her father deflect with humor her entire life. Every serious conversation becomes a bit. Every valid complaint becomes an opportunity for Rick to demonstrate how little he cares about criticism. So let's assemble the timeline, because the show never gives it to us cleanly. We have to piece it together from scattered references, implications, and the occasional direct statement buried in a joke. Diane and Beth C. 137 died when Beth was young, maybe 10, maybe younger. The show keeps the exact age vague. Rick C. 137 spent the next several decades hunting Rick Prime, killing other Ricks, building the Citadel, and generally not parenting anyone because everyone he would have parented was dead. At some point, he gave up the hunt. The trail went cold. Rick Prime remained unfound, and Rick C. 137 had exhausted himself chasing a ghost across infinite realities. He found the dimension Rick Prime had abandoned, the one where a Beth Smith had grown up without a father, and he moved in. Pretended to be the Rick who'd left. Let this Beth believe her father had finally come home. That Beth, the one we follow through most of the series, lived her entire childhood without Rick. She grew up, went to school, got pregnant at 17, married Jerry, had Summer and then Morty, became a horse surgeon, built an entire adult life. And then one day, Rick walked through the door like he'd just stepped out for cigarettes 20 years ago. "He abandoned us," Beth says in the Rick Shank Rickdemption. And the pain in that line is genuine, even though she's technically wrong. Her Rick abandoned her. The Rick who came back is a different Rick entirely, one who never raised her, one who's using her and her family as cover while he waits for Rick Prime to potentially return. Beth doesn't know this. For most of the series, she believes Rick is her Rick, that he left and came back, that somewhere under the alcoholism and the cruelty, there's a father who chose to return to her. She builds her entire emotional framework around this belief. She seeks his approval. She defends him to Jerry. She structures her identity around being the daughter smart enough, special enough, worthy enough to have Rick Sanchez as a father. "Don't deify the people that leave you," Beth tells Summer in the same episode, and it's clearly advice she's never managed to follow herself. The show explores this dynamic across multiple seasons. Beth's relationship with Rick is defined by desperate need disguised as casual acceptance. She laughs at his jokes. She takes his side in family arguments. She tolerates behavior from him that she'd never accept from anyone else, because tolerating Rick is the price of having Rick, and having Rick is the only thing that makes her feel special. In the Whirly-Durly conspiracy, Morty finally says what the show has been implying for seasons. You're willing to do anything just to prove you don't need Rick's approval, and it proves you do need it. And I don't know, maybe that's his fault. But still, you're a grown woman, and he's an asshole. So grow up and get over it. Harsh. Also accurate. Beth's entire personality has calcified around the wound of Rick's absence. She's competitive because Rick values intelligence. She's dismissive of Jerry because Rick is dismissive of Jerry. She's emotionally unavailable to her children in ways that directly mirror how Rick was emotionally unavailable to her. The cycle perpetuates because that's what unexamined trauma does. It replicates itself in the next generation, wearing slightly different clothes but carrying the same emptiness underneath. By the end of The ABCs of Beth, Rick offers his daughter a choice. He can clone her, let the clone stay, and be a mother and wife, while the real Beth goes off into the universe to have adventures and find herself. It's presented as a gift, as Rick finally giving Beth the freedom he thinks she wants. It's also Rick doing what Rick does, offering a technological solution to an emotional problem, creating distance instead of connection, building something elaborate to avoid dealing with something simple. Beth asks Rick to make the choice for her. She can't decide, so she hands the responsibility to him. Star Mort Rick turn of the Jerry reveals what happened next. Rick couldn't choose either. He cloned Beth, scrambled the labels, erased his own memory of which was which. Now there are two Beths, one on Earth, one in space, and neither knows if she's real. Rick's gift of freedom became a gift of existential uncertainty because apparently, even when Rick tries to do something nice for his daughter, he can't help making it complicated and painful. Holy shit, I'm a terrible father, Rick says at the end of that episode, watching a recording of himself explain the clone situation. It's played as a moment of realization, but is it really a realization? Rick has always known he's a terrible father. He's known since Fruppyland, since the weapons, since he left the first time and the second time and every time after that. The knowledge was never the issue. Knowing doesn't help. That's the tragedy of Rick's relationship with Beth. He's smart enough to diagnose the problem with perfect accuracy and completely incapable of doing anything about it. He loves Beth, the show makes this clear, in moments scattered across seasons, in the way he talks about her to others, in the lengths he'll go to protect her. He just can't love her in a way that actually feels like love to her. He can build dimensions and clone bodies and portal guns, but he cannot sit in a room with his daughter and say, "I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to earn my attention." Beth waited her whole life for her father to come home. When he finally showed up, he was still absent present in body, gone in every way that mattered. She got the genius. She got the adventures. She got Fruppyland and the weapons and the occasional moment of grudging approval. She never got a dad. But real quick before we keep going, if you're enjoying this so far, consider subscribing. It's free, and it genuinely helps us make better videos for this community. Alright, back to it. Section 4. The Replacement, Rick Potion, Number 9, and Casually Abandoning Your Entire Reality. Season 1, Episode 6. The episode that changed everything. Up until this point, Rick and Morty had been a funny, clever, animated comedy with some dark edges. Sure, there were alien parasites and interdimensional customs agents, and implications that Rick's worldview was deeply nihilistic. The show had teeth. The show had edge. What the show hadn't done yet was grab the audience by the throat and force them to confront the full implications of its premise. Rick Potion Number 9 fixed that. The setup is almost aggressively sitcom standard. Morty has a crush on Jessica. There's a school dance coming up. He asks Rick for help. Rick, because he's Rick, provides a love potion derived from vole DNA voles being rodents that pair bond for life. Simple enough. What could go wrong? Everything. Everything could go wrong. The potion piggybacks onto the flu virus Jessica happens to have, goes airborne, and infects the entire school. Then the entire town. Then the entire world. Everyone on Earth suddenly wants to have sex with Morty, which sounds like a teenage fantasy until you remember it includes elderly people, authority figures, and the phrase mantis DNA entering the equation when Rick tries to fix things and makes them catastrophically worse. By the episode's midpoint, the entire human population has been transformed into what Rick dubs Cronenberg's grotesque flesh monsters, named after the body horror filmmaker David Cronenberg, shambling through a ruined civilization while the Smith family fights for survival in a post-apocalyptic hellscape. And then comes the twist. Rick doesn't fix it. He can't fix it. The smartest man in the universe, the guy who always has a solution, who always pulls a last-minute save out of his lab coat pocket, he just shrugs. "There's an infinite number of realities, Morty," he explains, pulling up his portal gun. "And in a few dozen of those, I got lucky and turned everything back to normal." The solution, such as it is, involves finding a reality where Rick solved the problem, but then immediately died in an unrelated accident. Rick and Morty can simply step into that reality, take the places of their dead counterparts, continue their lives as if nothing happened. "What about the reality we left behind?" Morty asks, horrified. "What about the reality where Hitler cured cancer, Morty?" Rick responds. "The answer is, don't think about it." The episode ends with Morty, 14 years old, still processing the fact that he just helped destroy an entire world, burying his own corpse in the backyard. Rick handles this with characteristic detachment, treating the body disposal like a minor chore. Morty stares at his own dead face, shovels dirt onto his own chest, and then walks into a house that looks exactly like his house but isn't. He sits on a couch that isn't his couch. He looks at a family that isn't his family. The 1,000-yard stare Morty develops in that final scene doesn't fully go away for the rest of the series. This episode is doing approximately 7 different things at once, and all of them are devastating if you think about them for more than 30 seconds. Let's unpack them one at a time, because apparently we're doing this to ourselves tonight. First, the casual confirmation that Rick has done this before. We get 3 or 4 more of these, tops, Rick mentions while explaining the dimension-hopping escape plan. The implication being that he's already used up some of his replaceable reality allowance. This isn't Rick's first abandoned universe. This isn't even Rick's first abandoned universe this fiscal quarter. He treats dimension hopping like changing apartments inconvenient, sure, but ultimately just a logistical problem. The show never specifies how many realities Rick has burned through. It doesn't need to. The mere suggestion that there's a number, that Rick keeps track, that he's calibrated his escape strategy based on previous experience, that's enough. Rick Sanchez has left multiple worlds to rot because fixing them was harder than leaving. Second, the complete destruction of narrative safety. Most shows, even dark shows, even shows that kill main characters, operate within certain boundaries. Actions have consequences, but those consequences exist within a recoverable framework. The hero messes up, the hero fixes it. The status quo is restored or meaningfully changed. There's a cause and effect relationship between choices and outcomes that gives the story moral weight. Rick Potion number 9 throws that framework in the garbage. Rick and Morty don't learn a lesson. They don't grow from the experience. They don't even really suffer consequences, because they just leave. The consequences happening to a version of them that no longer exists in a dimension they'll never return to. The Summer and Beth and Jerry they abandoned are still fighting Cronenbergs in a ruined world, but our protagonists have moved on to a reality where none of that matters. The post-credits scene drives this home with brutal efficiency. The abandoned Smith family is shown surviving in the Cronenberg wasteland, and they're actually happy. Jerry and Beth's marriage, which was failing in the normal timeline, has been strengthened by apocalyptic survival. They explicitly say they don't miss Rick and Morty at all. The family Rick abandoned is doing better without him, which means Rick wasn't even necessary. He destroyed a world and then left, and the people he left behind adapted and thrived. His presence was the problem all along. Third, the philosophical implications of infinite replaceability. If there are infinite realities, and you can travel between them freely, what does permanence mean? What does loss mean? What does anything mean? Rick's answer, delivered with the confidence of someone who's thought about this extensively and decided not to care, is simple. Nothing means anything, so stop worrying about it. Family is interchangeable. Identity is interchangeable. You are interchangeable. There's always another version of everything, which means no version of anything is special. This is Rick's coping mechanism, weaponized into a worldview. He lost Diane and Beth in his original reality, and he couldn't replace them, not really. Not in any way that healed the wound. So he's decided that replacement is possible, that attachment is foolish, that the smart move is to never care about anything enough to be hurt when it's gone. The problem with this philosophy, and the show is very aware of this problem, is that it doesn't actually work. Rick clearly does care. He cares about Morty, about this version of Beth, about the specific people in his life, even though he could theoretically swap them out for identical copies. His nihilism is a performance, a shield, a lie he tells himself to avoid confronting the fact that loss still hurts him. But Morty doesn't know that yet. Morty just watched his grandfather casually abandon an entire universe and explain it away with a philosophy lecture. Morty is 14 years old, impressionable, traumatized, and now carrying the knowledge that his grandfather views reality itself as disposable. This is where Morty's cynicism comes from. Not from one adventure gone wrong, but from the accumulation of moments like this one. Rick teaching him, through example, that nothing is permanent and nothing is special, and the correct response to catastrophe is to shrug and find a replacement. Fourth, the specific horror of burying yourself. The grave scene works because it's visceral in a way most of the show's darkness isn't. Rick and Morty have encountered plenty of death, alien death, monster death, the implied death of billions when civilizations collapse. This is different. This is Morty looking at his own face, cold and dead, and having to physically put that body in the ground. The show lingers on it. There's no joke to cut the tension, no wacky sound effect to remind you this is a comedy. Just Morty, shoveling dirt, processing the fact that somewhere in the multiverse there's a version of him that didn't make it, that he is, in some sense, living a stolen life now, that the room he sleeps in belonged to someone else, someone who looked exactly like him and thought exactly like him and is now decomposing in the backyard. Rick handles the body disposal with zero emotional weight. Because Rick has practice, Morty doesn't have practice. Morty is being broken in real time, and Rick either doesn't notice or doesn't care enough to address it. Fifth, the establishment of Rick's relationship with consequences. Rick Sanchez does not experience consequences the way normal people do. This is partly because he's a genius who can science his way out of most problems, but it's also because he's fundamentally unwilling to sit with negative outcomes. When things go wrong, really wrong, unfixably wrong, Rick's response is to leave, change dimensions, find a reality where the problem doesn't exist, and pretend the other reality never happened. This is cowardice, dressed up as pragmatism. Rick frames his dimension hopping as the smart choice, the rational response to an impossible situation. And sure, from a pure survival standpoint, he's right. Staying in the Cronenberg dimension would have been dangerous and pointless. The damage was done. But the decision to leave, to never think about the people he abandoned, to treat his own trauma as a problem to be escaped rather than processed, that's not intelligence. That's avoidance. Rick can't handle consequences, so he's built a life where consequences don't apply to him. He's not solving problems. He's running from them at the speed of interdimensional travel. The tragedy is that Morty gets dragged along, learning the same lessons, developing the same coping mechanisms. By the time we reach later seasons, Morty has internalized enough of Rick's worldview that he barely flinches at horrors that would have destroyed him in season 1. He's been numbed by exposure, taught that attachment is foolish and replacement is always possible. Rick Potion number 9 is the episode where Rick and Morty stops being a show about wacky adventures and starts being a show about the psychological cost of living with someone who views reality as infinitely disposable. It's the episode that establishes the central tragedy. Rick is so afraid of loss, so damaged by his original grief, that he's built an entire philosophy around the idea that nothing matters enough to be mourned. He's wrong, of course. The show spends the next several seasons proving he's wrong, showing us moments where Rick's detachment cracks and his genuine feelings bleed through. He loves Morty. He loves Beth. He loves the specific people in his life, even though loving them contradicts everything he claims to believe. The lie is the point. Rick tells himself that family is replaceable because the alternative, admitting that he's already lost, the only family that can never be replaced, is too painful to contemplate. Every dimension hop, every casual abandonment, every don't think about it, is Rick running from the one reality he can't escape. The one where Diane and Beth died, and nothing he does will ever bring them back. Morty doesn't know any of this in season 1. Morty just knows that his grandfather made him bury his own corpse and told him not to worry about it. The grave is still in the backyard, by the way. The show references it occasionally, usually as a dark joke. Morty lives in a house with his own skeleton, decomposing a few feet from where his family eats breakfast. Don't think about it. Section 5. The loneliness, autoerotic assimilation, and the night Rick almost checked out. Season 2, Episode 3. There's a moment near the end of this episode where the show stops being a comedy. No transition, no warning, no wink at the audience to let them know something heavy is coming. 1 second Rick is Rick, sarcastic, detached, performing invulnerability like he's been doing it his whole life, and the next second, he's sitting alone in his garage, building a device designed to kill him. We need to talk about this. We need to talk about Unity, and the letter, and what it means that a show about interdimensional adventures and portal guns decided to end an episode with an unflinching depiction of a suicide attempt. We need to acknowledge that autoerotic assimilation contains maybe 11 minutes of genuinely devastating television buried inside a comedy about alien hive minds and stadium orgies. Let's start with Unity. Unity is a hive mind, a collective consciousness that assimilates entire populations, controlling every individual body while maintaining a single unified identity. When Rick and Morty's ship gets caught in Unity's tractor beam, Rick immediately recognizes the assimilation patterns. He's encountered Unity before. They have history. "Oh my God," Rick says, with an emotion that's hard to place. Unity? What follows is a reunion that plays like a romantic comedy. If romantic comedies involved planetary-scale possession and the ethical implications of dating someone who is simultaneously an entire civilization, Rick and Unity were in a relationship at some point in the past. The show never specifies when or how long or what exactly happened between them, but the chemistry is immediate and undeniable. And here's the thing that makes this episode work. Rick is happy. Genuinely happy. Uncomplicatedly happy. For the first and possibly only time in the entire series, we see Rick Sanchez without his defenses up. He's not performing cynicism. He's not drowning in alcohol to numb something. He's not being cruel to push people away. He's just enjoying himself, laughing, being present with someone who actually understands him. Unity can match Rick's scale. That's the key to their relationship and the source of its tragedy. Rick exists at a level of capability and awareness that makes connection with normal people almost impossible. He's too smart, too powerful, too aware of the cosmic insignificance of everything to relate to people who still care about mortgage payments and social niceties. Unity doesn't have that problem. Unity is a planetary civilization. Unity can engage with Rick on his level, can handle his chaos, can participate in his excesses without being destroyed by them. The episode shows this through increasingly absurd scenarios. Rick requesting a stadium full of redheads, Unity manifesting elaborate fantasies, the two of them engaging in activities that would be impossible with any single partner because Unity isn't a single partner. Unity is everyone. When Rick says he wants something, Unity can provide it at scale, and there's a giddy freedom in their interactions that Rick never displays with anyone else. Summer and Morty, meanwhile, are dealing with the B-plot, an alien being held captive in Unity's assimilated society, raising questions about free will and the ethics of hive mind control. It's a solid sci-fi premise that the episode mostly uses as contrast, the kids wrestling with moral complexity, while Rick ignores morality entirely in favor of hedonism. But the episode isn't really about ethics. The episode is about what happens when Rick gets everything he wants, and it still isn't enough. The cracks start showing midway through. Unity, under Rick's influence, begins losing control of assimilated individuals. Rick's chaos is infectious. His presence destabilizes Unity's carefully maintained order. They start drinking more. They start caring less about their responsibilities. They start becoming more like Rick, which sounds romantic until you remember what being like Rick actually means. Summer confronts Rick about this directly. "You're not healthy. You're not healthy for Unity, and you're not healthy for us." Rick's response is defensive and dismissive, but the accusation lands. He knows she's right. He's known from the beginning that he's toxic to the things he loves, that his particular brand of chaos doesn't coexist well with stability or growth or health. He just doesn't know how to be any other way. When Rick wakes up from a bender to find Unity gone, the shift in tone is immediate and devastating. Unity left a letter. The letter is devastating in its kindness, in its clarity, in the way it articulates exactly why their relationship can't work, while making clear that the failure isn't about love. Unity still loves Rick. That's the brutal part. The relationship isn't ending because feelings faded or because someone did something unforgivable. It's ending because Unity recognizes what being with Rick does to them. I realize now that I'm attracted to you for the same reason I can't be with you, Unity writes. You can't change, and I have no problem with that, but it clearly means I have a problem with myself. Unity explains that Rick makes them more like him, less controlled, less focused, less capable of maintaining the careful balance required to exist as a collective consciousness. Being with Rick feels good in the moment, but it costs Unity something essential. Their love is genuine, and their incompatibility is also genuine, and those two facts can coexist without either one being a lie. I lose who I am and become part of you, the letter continues. Because, in a strange way, you're better at what I do without even trying. Rick assimilates people. That's Unity's realization, and it's accurate. Rick doesn't control bodies the way Unity does, but he controls people nonetheless through force of personality, through intellectual dominance, through the gravitational pull of his chaos. Everyone in Rick's orbit eventually starts orbiting Rick. His family structures itself around his needs. His adventures become everyone else's adventures. His worldview seeps into the people who spend time with him until they start seeing things the way he does. Unity recognizes this pattern and makes the healthy choice. They leave, not because they stopped caring, but because staying would mean losing themselves entirely. The letter ends with Unity taking their entire civilization and departing, leaving Rick alone on an empty planet with nothing but his thoughts and a spaceship and the knowledge that he just lost the only being in the multiverse who could actually understand him. Rick goes home, and then the episode does something that animated comedies almost never do. It stays quiet. Rick walks into his garage. He looks around at the familiar space, the workbench, the tools, the detritus of 1,000 inventions. He's alone. Beth and the kids are elsewhere, doing their own things, unaware of what just happened. The house is silent. Rick opens a cabinet and pulls out a small creature, something Cronenberg-like, grotesque, clearly the result of one of his experiments. He thaws it with a serum, pets it gently as it cries out, and then vaporizes it with a homemade death ray. Then he sits down under the death ray himself. There's no dialogue in this scene, no voiceover explaining Rick's mental state, no cutaway to a joke that breaks the tension. Just Rick, alone, positioning himself under a device designed to kill, his finger on the trigger. The ray charges. Rick closes his eyes, and then he passes out from alcohol, from exhaustion, from something the show never specifies, and slumps forward, narrowly avoiding the beam as it fires into empty space. He survives by accident. The smartest man in the multiverse, who plans for every contingency, who always has an escape route, who treats death as a minor inconvenience in a universe of infinite possibilities. He tried to end his own life and only failed because his body gave out before he could finish. The episode ends there. No resolution, no next morning conversation about what happened. Just Rick, unconscious in his garage, having almost not been there anymore. This scene changed the show. Not in terms of plot. Rick's suicide attempt is rarely referenced directly in subsequent episodes, but in terms of what audiences understood about the character. Before autoerotic assimilation, Rick's nihilism could be read as cool, as aspirational even. He didn't care about anything. He was free from the emotional attachments that weighed normal people down. His detachment was a superpower. After this episode, that reading becomes impossible. Rick's nihilism isn't freedom, it's a cage. He's not detached because he's evolved beyond caring. He's detached because caring hurts too much, and he doesn't know how to handle it. The alcohol, the cruelty, the constant motion from adventure to adventure, it's all running. Running from the grief he can't process, from the loneliness he can't admit to, from the fundamental knowledge that he destroys everything he touches. Unity saw it. Unity articulated it in a letter, and then made the healthy choice to leave. Rick saw it too. In that moment alone in the garage, he saw exactly what he was and decided he didn't want to be it anymore. The show doesn't moralize about this. There's no therapist character appearing to deliver a speech about mental health resources. There's no heartfelt conversation where Rick admits he needs help. The episode just presents the scene raw, uncomfortable, true, and trusts the audience to sit with it. Autoerotic Assimilation is the episode that proves Rick and Morty understands its protagonist better than its protagonist understands himself. Rick performs in vulnerability. Rick claims nothing matters. Rick builds an entire identity around not caring. And underneath all of that performance is a man so lonely, so incapable of sustaining healthy relationships, so convinced of his own toxicity, that losing a relationship, even one he knew couldn't last, is enough to make him want to stop existing. The genius can solve any problem except the one that actually matters. He can build portal guns and defeat galactic governments and manipulate the fabric of reality itself. He cannot figure out how to be happy. He cannot figure out how to love someone without destroying them. He cannot figure out how to exist without the constant numbing of alcohol and adventure and chaos. Rick Sanchez almost died in his garage that night. The show never lets us forget that. Even when subsequent episodes return to comedy and absurdity and the comfortable rhythms of a cartoon about a mad scientist and his grandson, somewhere underneath the jokes, there's a man who built a death ray and sat under it and only survived because he was too drunk to pull the trigger in time. That's the show. That's always been the show. Autoerotic assimilation just made it impossible to pretend otherwise. Section 6. The Projection, the Ricklantis Mix-Up, and the society Rick built to hate himself. In the Ricklantis Mix-Up, also known as Tales from the Citadel, the show pulls off one of the most audacious bait and switches in television history. The episode opens with Rick and Morty preparing for an adventure to Atlantis. Full scuba gear, harpoon guns, the works. They're interrupted by a Rick and Morty from the Citadel asking for donations to a redevelopment fund, which our Rick dismisses with characteristic disdain. We're done with the Citadel of Ricks. I was never on board with it in the first place. That's why I murdered everyone in charge and left it to rot. Morty, curious, wonders aloud what day-to-day life on the Citadel must be like for the Ricks and Mortys who still live there. Rick's response is dismissive. Anyone continuing to explore the Citadel is either stupid or one of the unfortunate millions held hostage by their terrible ideas. Then they portal away to Atlantis, and the episode never shows us a single frame of that adventure. The entire runtime is devoted to the Citadel, the place Rick just told us doesn't matter, the society he abandoned, the millions of versions of himself and his grandson, living lives he considers beneath his notice. It's a middle finger disguised as a narrative choice, and it's brilliant. The Citadel of Ricks, for those who need a refresher, is exactly what it sounds like. A hidden, interdimensional city populated entirely by Ricks and Mortys from across the multiverse. It was founded after countless Ricks banded together originally to stop our Rick's revenge rampage, eventually to create a society where Ricks could exist free from the governments and institutions they despise. The result is a government with institutions, run by Ricks, for Ricks, featuring all the stratification, corruption, and systemic inequality that Ricks claim to be above. The episode structures itself as an anthology, following multiple storylines that intersect thematically while rarely crossing physically. Each story explores a different facet of Citadel society, and each one is devastatingly bleak in ways that sneak up on you between the jokes. Let's start with the factory. Rick J. 22 works at Simple Rick's Wafer Cookie Factory, stamping logos onto cookies for 15 years. The factory's product is, in itself, a horror show. They've captured a Rick from a reality where he chose family over science, hooked him up to a machine that loops his happiest memory forever, and harvests the chemicals his brain produces to flavor cookies. Come home to the impossible flavor of your own completion, the commercial purrs. Come home to Simple Ricks. This is what Ricks do with happiness. They can't experience it themselves, so they extract it from the one version of themselves who could, commodify it, and sell it to other Ricks desperate for a taste of something they've lost. The entire business model is built on the exploitation of contentment by beings incapable of contentment. Rick J. 22 has an existential crisis, murders his supervisor, takes Simple Rick hostage, and demands a portal gun so he can escape. The factory owner, Rick D. Sanchez III, complete with purple suit and gold cane, because capitalism needs its costumes, intervenes with a speech about Rick freedom and dignity. He walks J22 out of the factory like a hero. The workers cheer. It's triumphant. Then Rick D. Sanchez III shoots J22 inches the back of the head, hooks him up to the Simple Rick machine, and creates a new product line. Simple Rick's Freedom Wafer selects. Come home to the unique flavor of shattering the grand illusion. The Citadel monetizes rebellion. It absorbs dissent and sells it back to the dissenters. Rick J22's desperate bid for freedom becomes another flavor of cookie, consumed by Ricks, who will never taste actual freedom themselves. The system is inescapable because the system has learned to profit from escape attempts. Meanwhile, in Mortytown, Cop Rick is a rookie, fresh from the academy, partnered with Cop Morty, a veteran officer hardened by years on the streets. The dynamic inverts the usual Rick-Morty relationship. Here, the Rick is naive and idealistic, while the Morty is cynical and corrupt. Mortys are raised to be sidekicks, Cop Morty explains, as they drive through the slums. Without a side to kick, they just start kicking. Mortytown is where the Rickless Mortys end up abandoned, displaced, strung out on whatever passes for drugs in a dimension of infinite possibility. They're the byproduct of a society that treats Mortys as accessories, disposable companions whose value is entirely derived from their usefulness to Ricks. When that usefulness ends, they're discarded. The cop storyline plays out like a noir film, complete with corrupt officers, a crime lord named Big Morty, and a strip club called The Creepy Morty, where fully clothed Mortys dance for other Mortys in a scene that's somehow more disturbing than if they weren't clothed. Cop Rick tries to do the right thing. Cop Morty reveals he's been on Big Morty's payroll the whole time. There's a shootout. Cop Rick kills his partner. Same old story. Cop Rick tells the arriving officers. Rick's killing Mortys. The inversion of the earlier line, when Cop Morty covered up killing Mortys by saying, same old story, Morty's killing Mortys, lands like a gut punch. Violence flows in every direction on the Citadel. Ricks exploit Mortys, Mortys exploit each other, and anyone who tries to maintain integrity gets ground down by the machinery of a society that has no use for integrity. Then there's the school. 4 Mortys Slick, Glasses Morty, Fat Morty, and Lizard Morty skip graduation to find the wishing portal, a mythical place where Mortys can make wishes come true. They're all damaged in various ways. Slick has an experimental drama implant that makes him perpetually melancholic. Lizard Morty was fused with a lizard by a careless Rick. Fat Morty is Fat Morty. Their journey is a coming-of-age story compressed into 10 minutes, complete with stolen fruit, campfire confessions, and the gradual revelation that their destination might be more metaphor than magic. When they finally reach the wishing portal, Slick throws himself in. I wish anything about this life would change, he says, and then he's gone. The remaining Mortys stand in silence until a speaker crackles. Garbage dump, stand back. Pipes dump refuse into the portal. The wishing portal is where the Citadel throws its trash. Slick didn't find transcendence. He found the same nothing that awaits every Morty who dares to hope for something better. Maybe he went somewhere nice. Glasses Morty offers weekly. He didn't. The show makes sure we know he didn't. And threading through all of this, almost unnoticed until the final act, is candidate Morty, a Morty running for president of the Citadel. The news anchors mock him relentlessly. Here you see him in his little Morty suit, waving. Isn't that adorable, little jackass? And his campaign manager keeps trying to get him to drop out. He's a joke candidate, a protest vote, a symbol of how silly it would be for a Morty to actually hold power in a society built by and for Ricks. Then he gives a speech. I don't see a divide between Ricks and Mortys, he says, while the other candidates literally fart in response. The division I see is between the Ricks and Mortys, that like the Citadel divided, and the rest of us. The speech plays over montages of the other storylines, Rick J, 22, snapping, Cop Morty and Cop Rick rolling into Mortytown, the school Mortys sneaking out. Candidate Morty is articulating something that resonates across every stratum of Citadel society. The system is broken, and the people running it want it broken. But I've got a message for them, Candidate Morty continues. From the Ricks and Mortys that believe in this Citadel to the Ricks and Mortys that don't, you're outnumbered. He wins. By a landslide. The little joke candidate, the symbol of futile hope, becomes President Morty. And then the mask comes off. The Shadow Council of Ricks, the real power behind the Citadel, the oligarchs who've been running things since before the Council of Ricks existed, summons President Morty to inform him that nothing will actually change. They don't care who sits in the big chair. They're still in charge. President Morty snaps his fingers. Officers execute every Rick in the room who raised their hand in support of the Shadow Council's position. This seems like a good time for a drink, President Morty says, pouring brandy while bodies are dragged away. And a cold, Calculated speech with sinister overtones. A speech about politics, about order, brotherhood, power. But speeches are for campaigning. Now is the time for action. The episode ends with a shot of bodies floating in space outside the Citadel. Everyone who knew too much, everyone who got in the way, everyone who thought they understood what was happening. Among the debris, documents flutter past, showing photographs of a Morty with an eye patch. The same Morty we met way back in Close Rick Counters of the Rick kind. Evil Morty. The one who orchestrated the torture of thousands of Mortys. The one who escaped justice by hiding among the rescued victims. The one who's been planning this for seasons. He's president now. The Ricklantis mix-up works because it takes Rick's philosophy, his belief that he's special, that he's above the systems and hierarchies that constrain normal people, and shows what happens when that philosophy is scaled up to a civilization. The Citadel is Rick's ego made manifest, and it's a nightmare. Class warfare, institutional violence, the commodification of happiness, the systematic crushing of hope, all perpetuated by Ricks against Ricks and Mortys against Mortys. Rick built this. Maybe not personally, our Rick abandoned the Citadel before it became what it became, but Ricks built it. Infinite versions of the smartest man in the universe, given unlimited resources and complete freedom from external oversight, created a society indistinguishable from the worst aspects of every society they claim to despise. They're not special. They never were. Strip away the portal guns and the genius-level intellect, and you're left with the same petty hierarchies, the same exploitation, the same desperate scramble for meaning in a universe that doesn't provide any. The episode ends with our Rick and Morty returning from Atlantis, celebrating their adventure, completely oblivious to everything that just happened. Still not curious about what might have happened at that crazy Citadel place? Morty asks. Not at all, Rick says. That place will never have any bearing over our lives ever again. He's wrong. He's catastrophically wrong. But he doesn't know it yet, and the show lets him walk away happy, while the audience sits with the knowledge that evil Morty is now in charge of an interdimensional civilization, and nobody who could stop him has any idea. The Citadel matters. The Citadel is where Rick's self-loathing built a society, and now that society belongs to the one Morty smart enough to see Ricks for what they really are. Before we continue, if you haven't subscribed yet, it really helps out and costs nothing. We really appreciate the support. Let's jump back in. Section 7. The Deflection, Pickle Rick, and Therapy as the final boss. In Pickle Rick, the show created a monster. The episode won an Emmy. It spawned 1,000 memes. It caused grown adults to scream, "I'm Pickle Rick," at fast food employees and convention booths, and probably their own family members during holiday dinners. For a brief, terrible moment in 2017, you couldn't exist on the internet without encountering some variation of pickle-based Rick and Morty content, most of which completely missed the point of what the episode was actually saying. Which is fine. The episode is funny. The action sequences are genuinely incredible. Rick building a rat exoskeleton in a sewer, fighting his way through an entire government compound, teaming up with a man named Jaguar to escape in a helicopter. The animation team went absolutely feral on this one, delivering John Wick levels of choreographed violence starring a sentient pickle. If all you took away from Pickle Rick was, wow, cool action scenes, you got your money's worth. The episode works as pure entertainment. That's part of its genius. It also works as one of the most devastating character studies the show has ever produced, and the fact that most viewers missed this while laughing at pickle jokes is itself a meta-commentary on how we engage with media. We're so distracted by the spectacle that we miss the substance. Just like Rick wants us to be. Just like Rick wants himself to be. The premise is simple. The Smith family has a therapy appointment, court-mandated, following Summer huffing pottery glaze and Morty wetting his desk at school. These are cry-for-help behaviors from children dealing with something they can't articulate, and the school has correctly identified that the family needs professional intervention. Rick, rather than attend this appointment, has transformed himself into a pickle. I turned myself into a pickle, Morty. Boom. Big reveal. Morty's response is perfect. And Rick expects awe. Rick expects Morty to be impressed by the sheer scientific audacity of transforming human consciousness into a vegetable. What Rick gets is his grandson asking the only question that actually matters. Why? Why would anyone do this? Rick's answer is telling. The reason anyone would do this is, if they could, which they can't, would be because they could, which they can't. It's nonsense. It's deliberate nonsense. A verbal smokescreen designed to obscure the obvious truth that Beth immediately identifies. There's a syringe hanging above Rick's workbench, connected to a timer, set to go off exactly when the family would have left for therapy. Rick planned this. He transformed himself into a helpless pickle specifically to avoid sitting in a room and talking about feelings for an hour. The syringe is the smoking gun. Rick set up an elaborate Rube Goldberg machine to rehumanize himself the moment the family was gone. He never intended to stay a pickle, he intended to have an airtight excuse for missing therapy, then quietly reverse the transformation and spend the afternoon doing literally anything else. The pickle form was a performance, a bit, a way to make his avoidance look like an accident rather than a choice. Beth takes the syringe. The family leaves. Rick, now genuinely trapped in pickle form, gets knocked into the sewer by the family cat and has to science his way back to the surface. What follows is approximately 15 minutes of Rick being the most competent being in any room he enters. He builds weapons from bug parts, killing a cockroach and using its brain to control its limbs. He constructs a rat-powered exoskeleton, complete with retractable blades and a jetpack made from office supplies. He infiltrates a foreign government compound, kills dozens of trained agents, and escapes with an international assassin in a stolen helicopter. It's thrilling. It's impressive. It's exactly the kind of adventure Rick loves, high stakes, life or death, solvable through intelligence and violence. The episode lets us enjoy all of this. It wants us to be impressed, the same way Rick wants us to be impressed. Look at the pickle go. Look at him solve impossible problems with nothing but his genius and some dead rats. There's a moment during the rat fight where Rick delivers a monologue that sounds badass in context, but reveals something darker on reflection. By the way, he tells the rat he's about to kill, "You might notice that in spite of your numerous distinctive features, I never gave you a name like Scar or Stripe or Goliath. That's because, to me, you aren't special." Rick refuses to name things. He refuses to attach. The rat isn't special. It's just an obstacle. The agents aren't people. They're problems to be solved. Even Jaguar, a man with a tragic backstory involving a kidnapped daughter, gets dismissed when he tries to share his emotional motivation. "There's lots I wouldn't do to see my daughter," Rick says, casually admitting that his relationship with Beth isn't worth the effort Jaguar puts into his own family. This is who Rick is. The action sequences aren't showing us a hero, they're showing us someone who would rather fight to the death than feel something uncomfortable. Then Rick arrives at the therapy session. He's dying. The pickle body is failing, sustained only by mustard and tomato slices he scavenged during the compound battle. He needs the anti-pickle serum Beth took, and to get it, he has to sit down and actually participate in the conversation he's been avoiding. Dr. Wong, played by Susan Sarandon, because apparently the show's casting director has pictures of someone important, has been conducting the session without Rick. She's been asking questions about why Grandpa turned himself into a pickle, what that behavior pattern suggests about the family dynamic, why Beth seems so defensive about the whole thing. The kids have been making progress. Beth has been resistant, deflecting blame onto Summer and Morty, insisting that Rick's work is important and that his absence isn't the real issue. Dr. Wong has been gently pushing back. She's identified that the family dynamic punishes vulnerability and rewards emotional avoidance. She's suggested that this pattern might have eroded Beth's marriage and is now infecting the children. Beth's response, "Fuck you," confirms the diagnosis rather than refuting it. When Rick finally enters, dripping rat blood and pickle juice, Dr. Wong welcomes him calmly. She's not intimidated. She's not impressed. She's just a professional doing her job, and her job is to understand what's happening in this family. Rick asks for the syringe. Beth, prompted by Dr. Wong, asks him what's in it. "It's a serum that I need to stay alive," Rick admits. "I have had a rough day, and I've sustained a lot of damage. I'm pretty close to death, which the serum will prevent. By changing you from a pickle to a human," Dr. Wong clarifies. Yes. For the first time in the episode, Rick has to be honest. He can't science his way out of this conversation. He can't fight Dr. Wong. He can't escape through a portal or build a weapon from office supplies. He has to sit there, dying, and admit that he lied to avoid therapy. Dr. Wong asks why he didn't want to come. Rick's response is a masterclass in defensive intellectualization. He doesn't respect therapy. He's a scientist. He invents, transforms, creates, and destroys. When he doesn't like something about the world, he changes it. Why would he sit in a strip mall office and listen to someone explain which words mean which feelings? He goes further. Therapy, he argues, helps people get comfortable and stop panicking, which is a state of mind we value in the animals we eat. He's not a cow. He's a pickle when he feels like it. He's above this. It's a good speech. It's a speech designed to establish dominance, to position Rick as above the entire concept of emotional work. He's performing superiority, using his intelligence as a weapon to delegitimize the very idea that he might need help. Dr. Wong's response dismantles everything. She points out that Rick alternates between viewing his mind as an unstoppable force and an inescapable curse. She suggests that the only truly unapproachable concept for him is that his mind is within his control, that he chose to become a pickle, chose to come to therapy, chose to belittle her profession. He's the master of his universe, and yet he's sitting there dripping with rat blood and feces, his enormous mind literally vegetating by his own hand. She doesn't say this with anger or judgment. She says it with the calm clarity of someone who has seen this pattern before, many times, in many different configurations. Rick isn't special to her. He's a type, a recognizable pattern of avoidance dressed up in genius-level vocabulary. The thing about repairing, maintaining, and cleaning, she explains, is that it's work, boring work, work without adventure, without the possibility of dying heroically. There's no way to do it so wrong you might die. It's just showing up, day after day, doing the unsexy labor of keeping things functional. Some people are okay going to work. Some people would rather die. Each of us gets to choose. Rick doesn't argue. He can't argue because she's right. The entire episode has been Rick choosing death over work. He would rather transform into a pickle and fight his way through a sewer full of rats than sit in a room and talk about his relationship with his daughter. He would rather infiltrate a government compound and kill dozens of people than address why his grandchildren are acting out at school. The spectacular violence of the episode's middle section isn't Rick being awesome, it's Rick running away, at the highest possible volume, from the one challenge he can't handle. Being the smartest man in the universe is easy for Rick. He's been doing it his whole life. Building gadgets, solving problems, escaping from impossible situations, that's his comfort zone. That's where he feels powerful. Being present for his family is hard. Acknowledging that his behavior has consequences, that his choices affect the people who love him, that he can't just portal away from emotional damage that requires a kind of courage Rick doesn't have. It requires vulnerability. It requires showing up, consistently, for the boring work of maintaining relationships. Rick would rather die than do that work. The episode makes this literal. He nearly dies multiple times rather than go to therapy. And when he finally has no choice but to engage, he immediately pivots to taking Beth out for drinks, avoiding the family, avoiding the follow-up, avoiding any continuation of the work Dr. Wong started. "We should get a drink," he says, moments after being psychologically eviscerated. "Really? Like, go somewhere?" Beth responds, delighted. They drop the kids off. They go tie one on. Morty, sitting in the back seat, says quietly, "I liked her." Nobody responds. The comment hangs in the air, unacknowledged. Morty liked the therapist. Morty thought maybe something useful was happening. Morty, who has been traumatized by Rick's adventures repeatedly, who wet his desk at school because of unprocessed emotions, who could probably use some professional support that Morty gets ignored while Beth and Rick go drink together. The episode ends with Rick and Beth doing what they always do, choosing each other, choosing avoidance, choosing the comfort of mutual dysfunction over the discomfort of change. Dr. Wong's card probably goes in a drawer somewhere. The weekly sessions she suggested probably never happen. The family probably continues exactly as it was, held together by denial and enabled by the one person who could model healthy behavior, instead choosing to model escape. Pickle Rick became a meme because the surface is entertaining, the rat fights are cool, the action is impressive. "I'm Pickle Rick" is fun to yell. Underneath that surface is a portrait of a man so terrified of emotional intimacy that he would rather become a vegetable and fight for his life than spend an hour being honest with his family. The pickle was never the point. The pickle was the distraction for Rick and for us. Dr. Wong saw through it. She named the pattern and offered an alternative. Rick heard her, understood her, and chose to ignore everything she said. Most of the audience did the same thing. We memed the pickle and forgot the message, which is, itself, a very Rick way to hide. Section 8, The Replacement, Part 2, The Rick-Churian Morty Date, and Losing Beth Again. In The Rick-Churian Morty Date, the Season 3 finale pulls off a magic trick that most viewers didn't notice until the credits rolled. The A-plot is aggressively stupid on purpose. Rick and Morty are called to the White House to deal with some alien creature in the Kennedy sex tunnels, which exist, apparently, alongside the Truman Cocaine Lounge and the Lincoln Slave Coliseum. He didn't free them all. Rick and Morty get bored, blow off the mission to play Minecraft, and end up in an escalating pissing contest with the President of the United States that culminates in Rick literally fighting the leader of the free world in the Oval Office while screaming about being Doctor Who. It's absurd. It's petty. It's Rick at his most childish, treating international diplomacy like a personal slight and responding to mild disrespect with the full weight of his technological superiority. The president refuses to take a selfie with Morty, and Rick responds by essentially declaring war on America. He kills Secret Service agents. He destroys the Oval Office. He brokers peace between Israel and Palestine, specifically to annoy the president by giving him credit for it. The whole thing is a masterclass, in spite elevated to performance art. The joke is that this is what Rick considers important. While his family falls apart in the background, while his daughter spirals into existential crisis, while everything that actually matters crumbles, Rick is busy proving he's smarter than the president. He's fighting about nothing to avoid dealing with something. The president beef is the world's most elaborate distraction, and Rick is distracting himself as much as anyone else. Because the real story of this episode isn't happening in Washington. It's happening in Beth's head, and it's devastating. 2 episodes earlier, in The ABCs of Beth, Rick offered his daughter a choice. He could clone her, let the clone stay home with Jerry and the kids, while the real Beth went off to explore the universe and find herself. Beth, unable to choose, asked Rick to decide for her. Rick, unable to handle that responsibility, cloned Beth, scrambled the labels, and erased his own memory of which one was which. Now, Beth is spiraling. She calls Rick during the president nonsense to ask the only question that matters. Is she the clone? Rick says no. Beth asks if he would tell her if she were. Rick deflects with a philosophical observation about how smart people stop recognizing themselves when they get happy, how Beth's doubt is actually evidence of her intelligence, how everything is fine. It's exactly the kind of answer Rick would give regardless of the truth. It's reassuring and meaningless simultaneously. Beth hangs up and immediately starts screaming. The horror of Beth's situation is existential in the truest sense. She doesn't know if she's real. Her memories might be programmed. Her feelings might be artificial. Her entire sense of self might be a copy of someone else's identity, implanted so seamlessly that she can't tell the difference. And the one person who could tell her the truth, her father, the man who created this situation, has conveniently erased his own memory so he can honestly claim ignorance. Rick built himself plausible deniability out of self-inflicted amnesia. Whether Beth is a clone or not, Rick will never have to take responsibility for the answer, because Rick made sure he doesn't know the answer. It's a cowardly masterstroke, classic Rick problem solving. If you can't handle a situation, restructure reality until the situation no longer exists. Can't choose which Beth stays? Clone her. Can't live with knowing which one you chose? Erase the memory. Problem solved, except for the small matter of your daughter's entire sense of identity being shattered forever. Beth, meanwhile, has to live with the uncertainty forever. She goes to Jerry, which is itself significant. Beth seeking comfort from the man she divorced, the man Rick spent 3 seasons mocking and undermining, the man who represents everything Rick claims to despise about ordinary human weakness. Jerry, whose greatest crime is being aggressively normal. Jerry, who Rick called a parasite, a virus, a waste of Beth's potential. That Jerry, to his credit, doesn't try to science his way out of the problem. He doesn't have a test for clonehood. He doesn't have a philosophical framework for determining authentic selfhood. What he has is a memory, a specific moment from their dating years, a concert in the park, a Snickers wrapper stuck to his sweaty palm, the exact feeling of that first kiss. He recreates the moment. Beth remembers it, or her memories contain it, which may or may not be the same thing. Jerry declares her real based on nothing but shared history and emotional resonance. It's completely unscientific. It proves nothing. A clone would have the same memories, would feel the same feelings, would respond to the recreation the same way. Jerry's test is useless as verification and perfect as comfort. He's not proving Beth is real. He's telling her she's real to him, that her realness to him doesn't depend on her origin. The distinction matters. And it works, because what Beth needed wasn't proof. What Beth needed was someone to tell her she mattered, regardless of her origin. Jerry provides that. Rick never could. Beth and Jerry get back together. They call the kids home. The family reunites without Rick, around a foundation of love that has nothing to do with intelligence or portal guns or interdimensional adventure. It's aggressively ordinary. It's everything Rick mocks. It's also everything Rick can't do. This should feel triumphant. After 3 seasons of Rick systematically dismantling Jerry's place in the family, after a divorce that Rick openly celebrated, after countless moments of cruelty and dismissal, Jerry wins. The ordinary guy, the mediocre husband, the man Rick called a parasite and a virus, and worse things besides, he gets the girl. He gets his family back. He outlasts Rick's campaign against him through sheer persistence and genuine emotional availability. It doesn't feel triumphant. It feels exhausted. Beth isn't choosing Jerry because she's realized he's wonderful. She's choosing Jerry because she's too tired to keep fighting. The reconciliation happens in the shadow of clone doubt, in the aftermath of her father's ultimate betrayal of trust. She's not returning to Jerry. Out of love rediscovered, she's returning because at least Jerry is simple. At least Jerry is honest. At least Jerry won't create philosophical nightmares out of her identity and then conveniently forget the answers. Jerry is safe. Rick is dangerous. Beth chooses safety, and the choice looks less like growth than surrender. She's not running towards something. She's running away from the chaos Rick brings. The marriage that resumes isn't built on passion or renewed appreciation. It's built on mutual exhaustion and the shared understanding that things can't keep being this hard. Rick shows up at the cabin where the family is hiding. They're hiding from him, which says everything about where things stand, and the confrontation that follows is Rick at his most pathetic. He's carrying a weapon. Beth assumes he's there to kill her, to terminate the clone that's become self-aware. She delivers a speech about how she may not be his real daughter, but she's real to this family, how he can kill her, but he'll be killing something that matters to the people in this room. It's a brave speech, a defiant speech, the speech of someone who has accepted that she might die and decided to face it with dignity. Rick's response undercuts everything. He's not there to kill Beth, he's there to kill Jerry. It's a joke, sort of. Rick being Rick, threatening violence against the son-in-law he despises. But it's also genuinely unhinged. Rick showed up to a family reunion with a weapon because he can't handle losing control of the situation. He can't handle Beth choosing Jerry. He can't handle the family reforming without him at the center. The man who fights presidents over selfies, who goes to war with America over perceived disrespect, can't stand the idea that his family might function without him. The man who claims nothing matters, who insists family is interchangeable and attachment is foolish, is having a tantrum because his family stopped prioritizing him. Rick rants about Jerry's mediocrity, about how Jerry's ordinariness is somehow a weapon that defeats genius, about how nothing that's happening matters because it's happening infinite times across infinite realities. He delivers the multiverse speech he always delivers when things get emotionally uncomfortable, the reminder that none of this is special, that infinite versions of this conversation are happening right now, that caring is statistically meaningless. The family just stares at him. Summer farts. Rick admits, grudgingly, that it was subjectively funny. And then he stays. Morty asks if he's going to stay, and Rick runs through all the reasons he shouldn't. He's an enemy of America now. He's the lowest status character in his idiot family. There are infinite timelines where things went better for him, but he stays. He puts on a stupid fly fishing hat and pretends to be a different Rick, so the president will let him off the hook. He sits down at the dinner table with Jerry and Beth and the kids. The season ends with the family eating Panda Express together, making jokes about Beth maybe being a clone, laughing about how Rick would never tell them the truth anyway. It's a dark joke, wrapped in a happy ending, wrapped in the knowledge that nothing has actually been resolved. Beth might be a clone. Rick might be lying about not knowing. Jerry and Beth's reconciliation might be built on exhaustion rather than love. The family has reformed, but the foundation is made of unaddressed trauma and deliberate ignorance. Everyone is pretending things are okay because the alternative, actually dealing with what happened, is too overwhelming to contemplate. Beth tells Rick he can't talk to Jerry that way anymore. They're a real family now. She says things will be like season 1, but more streamlined. It's meta-commentary disguised as dialogue, the show acknowledging that it's resetting to a familiar status quo while making clear that the reset is artificial, chosen, a collective decision to pretend things are okay rather than do the work of making them actually okay. Some are jokes that Beth using the word eschewed is suspicious, maybe she is a clone. Everyone laughs. The implication that Rick would never tell them the truth is treated as a punchline rather than the horrifying betrayal it actually represents. Rick lost Beth again. He lost her the moment he offered her the clone choice, and he lost her more completely when he made that choice impossible to resolve. She's sitting right there at the dinner table, and she might as well be in another dimension. He'll never know if she's his daughter or a copy of his daughter, and he did that to himself. He had the answer. He chose to forget it, and now he gets to live with the uncertainty forever, just like she does, except he built the uncertainty on purpose. The season 3 finale presents a family reunion as its happy ending, and every element of that reunion is poisoned by Rick's choices. Jerry won by default. Beth stopped fighting. The kids learned that Grandpa will threaten violence when he doesn't get his way. And Rick, the smartest man in the universe, sits at the table wearing a stupid hat, eating sugar chicken, having achieved nothing except the temporary postponement of consequences. He's not above it. He never was. The pettiness, the insecurity, the desperate need to matter, it's all right there, wearing a fly fishing costume and pretending to be someone else. Before we move on, just a small reminder to subscribe if you like the content. It's free and helps us keep improving these videos. Now, let's continue. Section 9, The Confession, the Vat of Acid episode, and Rick's pettiness as emotional violence. In the Vat of Acid episode, Rick Sanchez commits one of the cruelest acts in the entire series. Not against an enemy, not against a galactic government or an alternate version of himself or some cosmic threat. Against Morty, his grandson, the person he supposedly cares about more than anyone else in the multiverse. And he does it because Morty made fun of a fake vat of acid. That's the inciting incident. That's the thing that sets this entire nightmare in motion. Rick devises an elaborate escape plan involving a vat of fake acid with built-in air hoses and quick-release bones. The plan goes sideways when the criminals they're dealing with decide to test the acid, and the whole thing falls apart in embarrassing fashion. Morty, reasonably, points out that it was a stupid plan. Rick does not take this well. The argument escalates. Morty brings up his own idea, a device that would let you save your place in life, like in a video game, try things out, and then reset if they go wrong. Rick dismisses it as derivative, as time travel, which he refuses to do, as beneath his genius. Morty pushes back. Rick gets defensive. The whole thing becomes less about the specific ideas and more about Rick's inability to accept criticism from someone he considers intellectually inferior. Rick storms off. Morty thinks he's won something. He hasn't. Rick builds the device. Not because it's a good idea he still thinks it's stupid, but specifically to prove a point. He creates an elaborate trap disguised as a gift, designed to teach Morty a lesson about why Morty's ideas are bad and Rick's ideas are good. The pettiness of this cannot be overstated. Rick Sanchez, the smartest man in infinite universes, dedicates his genius to winning an argument with a 14-year-old. The device works exactly as advertised. Morty gets a remote that lets him save moments in time and reset back to them if things go wrong. He uses it to take risks without consequences, approaching Jessica, doing stupid stunts, living without fear of failure. The show presents this as a montage of liberation. Morty finally free from the anxiety that defines his existence. Then Morty meets a girl. Not Jessica, someone new, someone he encounters randomly during his consequence-free adventures. They connect. They fall in love. The relationship develops over what feels like months, maybe years. Morty stops using the device. He commits to this person. He builds a life. The show takes its time with this. We watch Morty and this woman go through the stages of a real relationship. First dates, awkward moments, growing comfort, inside jokes, the small intimacies that accumulate into something meaningful. We see them move in together. We see them survive hardship. There's a plane crash, a period of survival in the wilderness, the kind of shared trauma that bonds people in ways that can't be explained. Morty is happy, genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. The device sits unused. He's chosen this life, this person, this version of reality. He's done playing games. And then Rick shows up. The reveal is devastating in its casualness. Rick explains that the device was never actually saving and resetting. What it was doing was more complicated. Isolating moments in time, splitting probable selves, shunting Morty into near-duplicate parallel realities at the moment of determination. Every time Morty pressed the button, he wasn't undoing what happened. He was abandoning a timeline where it did happen and jumping to a fresh one. The Mortys he left behind? Still there, still dealing with the consequences Morty thought he was erasing. Every risk Morty took, every death he died, every embarrassment he fled, those all happened to real versions of himself who didn't get to reset. Morty has been, effectively, killing himself over and over, leaving corpses scattered across the multiverse so he could have a clean slate. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is the girl. The relationship. The life Morty built. She doesn't remember him. From her perspective, none of it happened. The months of falling in love, the plane crash, the survival, the intimacy, all of it exists only in Morty's memory. He remembers every moment of their relationship. She's never seen him before. Rick did this on purpose. Every step of it was calculated. He knew Morty would use the device frivolously at first. He knew Morty would eventually find something worth keeping. He knew that when Morty finally cared about something, that would be the moment to pull the rug out. The cruelty is surgical. Rick wanted to make Morty feel the consequences of having ideas, of wanting things, of thinking he could have something good without Rick's involvement. The lesson isn't, your idea was flawed. The lesson is, this is what happens when you challenge me. Rick even frames it as Morty's fault. My hands are clean, he says. I gave you a choice. Morty could have listened to the scientific explanation. He chose fun instead. Everything that happened after is on Morty, according to Rick's logic. This is gaslighting dressed up as education. Rick built a trap, baited it with exactly what Morty wanted, watched Morty walk into it, and then blamed Morty for getting hurt. The architect of the destruction takes no responsibility for the destruction. Classic abuser logic. The episode ends with Morty forced to publicly humiliate himself by jumping into a real vat of acid to escape the consequences of actions he took during his consequence-free period. Every organization he wronged during his montage of liberation shows up demanding justice. Morty has no choice but to fake his death in front of everyone. And Rick's final demand? Morty has to admit the vat was a good idea. He has to kiss the vat. He has to submit, publicly and completely, to Rick's superiority. This is who Rick Sanchez is when he's not fighting aliens or toppling governments. This is Rick in his purest form, a man so incapable of accepting criticism that he will psychologically torture his own grandson to win an argument about whether a fake vat of acid is a clever escape plan. The episode won an Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program. It's genuinely funny. Throughout the montage is scored perfectly. The fake out with Rick pretending he couldn't build the device is hilarious. The final sequence with the various aggrieved parties is absurdist in the best way. The comedy works, but underneath the comedy is something genuinely disturbing. Rick loves Morty. The show has established this repeatedly. Rick has risked his life for Morty, cried over memories of Morty, chosen Morty over infinite other Mortys who could theoretically replace him. This isn't a relationship of pure exploitation. Rick cares. And Rick did this anyway. That's what makes it so dark. This isn't Rick being cruel to an enemy or a stranger. This is Rick being cruel to someone he loves, because that person dared to question his judgment. The pettiness is the point. Rick's ego is so fragile, his need for dominance so absolute, that he cannot let even mild criticism from a child go unanswered. Morty's crime was making Rick feel stupid for a moment. Morty's punishment was having his heart broken, his sense of self shattered, and his belief in consequence-free happiness destroyed. The punishment is wildly disproportionate to the offense, and that disproportion is deliberate. Rick wanted Morty to feel small. Rick wanted Morty to understand that challenging Rick leads to devastation. The message Morty receives is clear. Don't have ideas. Don't question Rick. Don't think you know better. Every time you try to be your own person, Rick will find a way to remind you that you're nothing without him. This is emotional violence. It's presented as comedy, wrapped in science fiction conceits, disguised as a lesson about consequences. But strip away the parallel dimensions and the probability manipulation and the reset buttons, and what you have is a grandfather systematically breaking his grandson's spirit because the grandson talked back. Rick could have just built the device and let Morty enjoy it. He could have explained the flaws and let Morty learn naturally. He could have done literally anything other than engineering a scenario specifically designed to cause maximum emotional damage at the moment of maximum vulnerability. He chose not to. He chose cruelty, and then he framed it as a favor. The Vat of Acid episode is one of the funniest episodes the show has ever produced. It's also one of the most revealing. Rick's nihilism, his detachment, his nothing matters philosophy, it's all a performance. If nothing mattered, he wouldn't have spent weeks building an elaborate trap to punish a teenager for hurting his feelings. Rick cares deeply. He just expresses that care through control, manipulation, and punishment. He loves Morty, and his love looks like this. Engineered heartbreak, calculated humiliation, total dominance. The Vat was never about the Vat. The Vat was about Rick proving that he wins every argument, even the ones that don't matter, especially the ones that don't matter. Morty will think twice before criticizing Rick's plans again. That was always the point. Section 10. The reveal, Rick Murray Jack, and evil Morty escaping the system. In Rick Murray Jack, the Season 5 finale, the show finally answers questions it's been asking since the beginning. Who is Rick Sanchez? Really? What happened to make him this way? And what is evil Morty actually trying to accomplish? The answers are worse than anyone expected. The episode opens with Rick having abandoned Morty for the two crows, a relationship that seemed like a joke but has apparently lasted years. Morty, using an aging serum, shows up looking 40 years old, begging Rick to come home before Jerry dies of cancer. Rick dismisses him, too invested in his new crow-based identity to acknowledge what he's lost. Then the crows dump Rick for their ex, a scarecrow named Crow Scare, and suddenly Rick has nothing left but the family he abandoned. He returns home, sheepish and defensive, pretending he chose to leave the crows rather than admitting he was rejected. The family pretends to believe him. Everyone pretends this is a fresh start. It's not a fresh start. It's the same pattern Rick has repeated his entire life. Attach, destroy, abandon, return when he has no other options, pretend it was his choice all along. Rick and Morty go to the Citadel to reverse Morty's aging, and that's when things get complicated. The Citadel has been rebuilt since Rick destroyed it, now run by President Morty, the same Morty who rose to power in the Ricklantis mix-up, the same Morty who's been planning something since Season 1. President Morty invites Rick to dinner. Rick is suspicious. President Morty is charming and dismissive and clearly hiding something. The tension builds until President Morty reveals his hand. He's been scanning Rick's brain, collecting schematics for the Citadel's dimensional drive. He's planning to destroy something called the Central Finite Curve. Rick's reaction is immediate panic. Whatever the curve is, it's important enough that Rick tries to kill President Morty on the spot. The force field holds. President Morty smirks, and then he does something unexpected. He shows Morty the truth. The truth is this: Mortys are manufactured. The Citadel doesn't just collect naturally. Occurring Rick and Morty pairs it, actively creates them. Rick scan universes for compatible Beths and Jerrys, manipulate them into meeting, ensure pregnancies that produce Mortys. When Mortys die on adventures, which they do, constantly new ones are cloned, implanted with memories, and delivered to replace them. Morty isn't special. Morty isn't unique. Morty is a product, mass-produced to serve Rick's needs, bred for forgiveness and compliance. The revelation hits Morty like a physical blow. Everything he thought he knew about his relationship with Rick, about his own identity, about why he exists, all of it crumbles. He's not Rick's grandson in any meaningful sense. He's a tool, a coping mechanism, a living shield designed to make Rick's life easier. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is the central finite curve. Rick built it. Our Rick, specifically. After Diane and Beth died, after Rick failed to find their killer, after decades of hunting and murdering other Ricks, C-137 helped construct a barrier around a subset of the multiverse. The curve contains only those realities where Rick Sanchez is the smartest being in existence. Every universe inside the curve is a universe where Rick matters most. The implications of this are staggering. Rick restructured infinity itself to guarantee his own supremacy. He built a prison made of universes, trapped everyone inside it, and ensured that no matter where he went, no matter which reality he visited, he would always be the most important person in the room. The hubris is almost incomprehensible. Rick Sanchez, grieving and broken and unable to cope with loss, decided that the solution was to wall off a section of the multiverse where he could never feel small again. He created a reality where his intelligence would always be validated, where his genius would always be relevant, where no version of himself would ever have to confront the possibility that someone else might be smarter. Evil Morty understands this perfectly. He explains it to Morty with the weariness of someone who spent years figuring out a puzzle everyone else refused to see. Every Rick inside the curve claims to be a victim. Every Rick has an excuse. None of them take responsibility because the system is designed to protect them from responsibility. They built a wall around infinity, Evil Morty says. Separated all the infinite universes from all the infinite universes where he's the smartest man in the universe. Every version of us has spent every version of all of our lives in one infinite crib built around an infinite fucking baby. Evil Morty isn't trying to rule the Citadel. He isn't trying to destroy Rick. He's trying to leave. He wants to escape the curve entirely, to find universes where Rick doesn't dominate everything, where being a Morty doesn't automatically mean being subordinate to Rick's ego. That's what makes him evil. He's sick of Rick. He refuses to forgive. He refuses to accept the role he was bred for. The episode fills in Rick's backstory through a brain scan sequence that confirms what the Rickshank Rickdemption hinted at years earlier. The memory of Diane and Beth's death was real. Rick did spend decades hunting their killer. He did become an arms dealer, a freedom fighter, a mass murderer of alternate selves. He did help build the Citadel as part of a truce after other Ricks couldn't stop him, and he did eventually give up the hunt, moving into the universe his target had abandoned, pretending to be the Rick who left, waiting for Rick Prime to potentially return. The backstory doesn't make Rick sympathetic. If anything, it makes him worse. This isn't a man who was broken by tragedy and did his best to cope. This is a man who responded to tragedy by becoming a tyrant, who built a prison for infinite beings because he couldn't handle feeling powerless, who manipulated reality itself to feed his ego. Rick C-137 isn't a victim of the Citadel or the Curve or any of the systems that trap Ricks and Mortys together. He's the architect. He built this. Other Ricks maintain it, but our Rick designed the cage. Evil Morty's escape is the climax of the episode. He activates the Citadel's dimensional drive, tears a hole in the central finite curve, and flies through into the space beyond. The sequence is set to For the Damaged Coda, the same song that played during his first reveal in Season 1, and it's genuinely triumphant in a way the show rarely allows. Evil Morty floats in the void between universes, looks at a holographic representation of the curve, and watches it burst into sparkles. He pulls out a golden portal gun, different from Rick's green one, and opens a portal to somewhere else. Somewhere Rick can't follow. Somewhere the rules are different. He's free. The first Morty to ever escape the system Rick built. The first being to break out of the infinite crib. Our Rick and Morty survive, barely, by detaching a section of the Citadel and riding out the explosion. Rick's portal gun is empty. They're stranded, floating in space, surrounded by debris and corpses, watching everything Rick helped build collapse into nothing. Morty asks the question that's been building all episode. Did Rick really leave the crows for Morty? Or did he only come back because the crows dumped him? Rick doesn't answer. He can't answer, because the answer is obvious and admitting it would require vulnerability he's incapable of. Evil Morty was right about everything. Rick uses Morties. Rick needs Morties. Rick's entire existence inside the curve is predicated on having someone to feel superior to, someone to drag on adventures, someone to witness his genius and validate his importance. The relationship isn't love, it's dependency disguised as mentorship. Every Morty who's ever felt sick of Rick, every Morty who's ever doubted whether Rick actually cares, every Morty who's ever wondered if they're just a tool, Evil Morty articulates what they've all felt. And by escaping, he proves that escape is possible. Just not for Rick. Rick is too committed to the system he built. He's too invested in being the smartest man in every room. He could theoretically follow Evil Morty through the breach, find universes where he's not automatically supreme, learn to exist without the crutch of guaranteed superiority. He won't. The curve is a prison Rick built for himself, because the alternative is facing a multiverse where he might not matter. Evil Morty understood this. Evil Morty saw through the system, refused to participate, and found a way out. Our Morty is still inside, still attached to Rick, still hoping that underneath the manipulation and the cruelty, there's something worth saving. The episode ends with Rick and Morty stranded together, their portal gun useless, their relationship as complicated as ever. Nothing is resolved. The curve is breached but not destroyed. Evil Morty is gone, beyond reach, living a life we'll never see. What remains is the knowledge of what Rick did, the truth about the curve, about manufactured Mortys, about the system designed to ensure Rick's eternal dominance. Morty knows now. He can't unknow it. Whether that changes anything, whether Morty can ever look at Rick the same way, whether Rick can ever acknowledge what he's done, whether their relationship can survive the weight of this revelation remains to be seen. But Evil Morty is free. The first one ever. The one who was sick of Rick and did something about it. If that makes him evil, then maybe evil is just another word for refusing to forgive. Before we go any further, consider subscribing if this has been helpful so far. It supports the channel and lets us keep building this community. Let's continue. Section 11. The Vulnerability, Forgetting Sarek Morchul, and Losing Morty. In Forgetting Sarek Morchul, the show finally asks the question it's been dancing around for 5 seasons. What happens if Morty just leaves? Not dies, not gets kidnapped, not temporarily separated during an adventure, just walks away, says, "I'm done with this," and means it, chooses himself over Rick for once. The answer, it turns out, is that Rick completely falls apart while pretending he's fine. The episode begins with a fight. Morty has been secretly topping off Rick's portal fluid with Mountain Dew to cover up how much he's been using without permission. Rick discovers this, lectures Morty about how dangerously toxic the fluid is, and reminds Morty for approximately the 80,000th time that he can be replaced. Morty snaps. He calls Rick's bluff. "Replace me," he says. "Just do it." Rick, because he's Rick, has been preparing for this moment. He pulls out a literal wheel, the wheel of better things than Morty, covered in alternatives he could theoretically swap in. A sentient pile of shit. Half of Paul Giamatti. 2 crows. He spins it with theatrical spite and lands on 2 crows. The cruelty is the point. Rick doesn't actually believe 2 crows are better than Morty. He built the wheel specifically to have a prop for this moment, to make Morty feel worthless, to win the argument through sheer commitment to pettiness. It's the vat of acid, episode energy all over again. Rick would rather invest tremendous effort into hurting Morty than admit he cares. Morty leaves. Actually leaves. Walks out of the garage and doesn't come back. What follows is 2 parallel storylines that explore what life looks like on both sides of a Rick separation. Rick's storyline is absurdist by design. He adopts 2 crows as his new adventure partners, trains them in the ways of interdimensional travel, and commits to this bit with the intensity of someone who knows they're performing. The crows are fine. They're actually kind of good at the job. Rick teaches them to do cool action moves and gives them little training montages. But the episode keeps undercutting Rick's apparent contentment. He's trying too hard. He's overselling how great the crows are. When the crows eventually meet other crows and learn about crow enlightenment, Rick gets genuinely upset, not because he misses Morty, he insists, but because the crows are supposed to need him, not the other way around. Rick Sanchez cannot handle being left. His entire self-concept depends on being the one who leaves, the one who chooses, the one who matters so much that others should be grateful for his attention. When Morty leaves, And then the crows threaten to leave. Rick's carefully constructed narrative of self-sufficiency starts cracking. Morty's storyline is darker and more illuminating. The portal fluid that splashed on Morty's hand creates a connection to someone else who got portal splashed, a man named Nick, currently institutionalized in a mental asylum. Nick was someone Rick encountered years ago, gave a taste of adventure, and then discarded when he became inconvenient. Nick isn't evil. He's not a villain. He's just broken a man who touched something extraordinary, got abandoned by the person who showed it to him, and never recovered. The guards beat him on Sundays. They lick his face on Mondays. He's accepted this existence because after Rick was done with him, he couldn't figure out how to exist in the normal world anymore. This is what Rick does to people. He shows up, changes everything, makes himself the center of someone's universe, and then moves on when he gets bored or annoyed. The people he leaves behind don't get portal guns or interdimensional adventures. They get trauma and an inability to readjust to ordinary life. Morty rescues Nick from the asylum. They form the Portal Boys, a two-person team dedicated to having adventures without Rick. They break into Rick's garage, steal equipment, and set off to prove they don't need him. The adventure goes badly. Nick, it turns out, isn't a fellow victim of Rick's abuse. He's someone who tried to steal Rick's portal gun and got catapulted to Australia as punishment. His victimhood narrative was real in some ways, but his response to trauma has curdled into something darker. He starts killing people. He becomes possessive of Morty. He threatens to make Morty's life hell if Morty doesn't fall in line. Morty realizes, with dawning horror, that Nick is what a Rick-damaged person looks like when they don't have a healthy way to process the damage. Nick's response to being discarded was to become controlling and violent himself. He learned the wrong lessons from his encounter with Rick. Morty's response, by contrast, has been to stay, to keep coming back, to absorb the abuse while maintaining hope that somewhere underneath Rick's cruelty is something worth saving. Whether that's healthier than Nick's path is debatable, but at least Morty hasn't started murdering people. The climax brings both storylines together. Morty, desperate and outmatched, calls Rick. Rick, in the middle of dealing with crow drama on an alien planet, answers. What follows is a moment of actual vulnerability from both of them. Morty apologizes. He admits he messed up, that he spilled portal fluid and didn't tell Rick, that he got into a rebound situation with a psycho, that he left a trail of dead. He says he did it because Rick hurt his feelings when he chose the two crows. Rick's response is unexpected. Jesus, it was a bit. That's it. That's Rick's defense. The wheel, the crows, the theatrical replacement, it was a bit. A performance. Rick never actually intended to permanently replace Morty with birds. He was just being cruel because cruelty is his default mode when he feels vulnerable. Morty says he misses Rick. Rick, caught off guard, admits the same thing. Then, realizing he's been too honest, he hangs up to deal with his crow situation. The crows, having learned about crow enlightenment and decided they want to pursue their own journey, give Rick a choice. Stay with them and learn to be a better person, or go back to Morty and keep being the same toxic mess he's always been. Rick chooses the crows, but not because he doesn't love Morty, because he does. And he knows what he does to people he loves. The episode ends with Rick telling Morty that their relationship was abusive, that Rick was a bad partner because he never made Morty a true partner, that the crows taught him to see this, and now he needs to leave with them to learn what they can teach him. It's framed as growth. Rick is finally acknowledging the damage he's done and choosing to work on himself rather than continuing to hurt the person closest to him. He gives Morty the portal gun. He says he'll always be Morty's grandpa. He leaves. Except we know, because the next episode is Rick Mirai Jack, that this doesn't last. Rick doesn't actually pursue crow enlightenment. He doesn't fundamentally change. The crows dump him for their ex, and Rick comes crawling back to Morty with a story about how he chose to leave them. The vulnerability was real. The recognition that the relationship is abusive was real. The commitment to change was fake, another performance, another bit, another way to avoid actually doing the work. This is the tragedy of Rick Sanchez in miniature. He's capable of insight. He can see, clearly, what he does to people. He can articulate the pattern, acknowledge the damage, express genuine remorse. What he can't do is sustain change. What he can't do is show up consistently, day after day, doing the boring work of being a good person. Dr. Wong called this in Pickle Rick. Some people would rather die than do the maintenance work of relationships. Rick would rather pursue crow enlightenment on an alien planet, would rather do literally anything dramatic and interesting than sit with the discomfort of changing his behavior in small, consistent ways. The crows, ultimately, are just another escape, another adventure, another way to avoid the real challenge, which is being present for the people who love him without destroying them in the process. Morty, left alone with a portal gun and no grandfather, probably feels abandoned, and he probably also feels a tiny bit hopeful. Maybe Rick really will change. Maybe this time is different. Maybe the crows will teach him something. The hope is misplaced. It always is. But Morty keeps hoping anyway, because that's what Mortys do. They were bred for forgiveness. After all, evil Morty will explain that soon enough. But even without knowing the full truth about Morty manufacturing and the central finite curve, forgetting Sarek Mortshaw makes clear what the Rick-Morty relationship actually is. A cycle of damage and return, abuse and reconciliation, leaving and coming back. Rick can't stay. Morty can't leave permanently. They're trapped in each other's orbits, pulled together by something neither of them fully understands, hurting each other in ways that have become so familiar they feel like love. The crows got out. They recognized the pattern and chose their own path. Good for them. Rick and Morty don't get that option. They're stuck with each other, for better or worse, until one of them finally breaks the cycle for good. So far, neither of them has managed it. Section 12. The Fear No Mort, and what actually scares an unkillable god. In Fear No Mort, the show finally forces Rick to confront what he's actually afraid of. Not aliens, not death, not cosmic horror or interdimensional threats, or any of the things that populate his daily existence. Something worse. Happiness. The episode begins with Rick and Morty visiting a carnival of nightmares that no longer scares them. They've seen too much, done too much. The animatronic monsters and haunted houses feel quaint, almost boring. A strange man overhears them lamenting this and offers to show them the scariest place in the galaxy. It's a Denny's. Specifically, a Denny's with a hole in the men's bathroom floor. The fear hole, as it's called, is a simple premise. You jump in, the hole manifests your greatest fear, you conquer that fear and come out fearless. The hole gets to eat the fear. Apparently it's like those fish that nibble dead skin off your feet and you get your picture on the wall. There are only 3 pictures on the wall. The hole has been there since VHS tapes were a thing. Morty jumps in before Rick can stop him. Rick, unwilling to let his grandson face something alone, despite everything he claims about not caring, follows. What happens next is the bulk of the episode, and it's structured as a layered nightmare that keeps revealing deeper fears beneath the surface ones. Rick's initial fear manifestation is simple. Enemies with guns, no weapons to defend himself. He conquers it quickly, builds weapons from nothing, defeats the threat. Easy. This is the kind of fear Rick handles every day. But then Diane appears. Not old Diane, not a memory. Young Diane, pulled from the moment of her death, confused and terrified, suddenly in the Smith family living room with her adult daughter and grandchildren she's never met. Rick's reaction is immediate and telling. He assumes they're still in the hole. This can't be real. His dead wife can't actually be standing in front of him, because if she were real, he'd have to deal with that. And dealing with that is unthinkable. Morty suggests maybe this is the fear. Maybe Rick's greatest fear is getting a second chance with Diane and blowing it. Rick dismisses this theory, but he can't dismiss it entirely, because Morty might be right. What follows is Rick doing what Rick does, deflecting through science and sarcasm. He de-ages himself to match Diane's youth. He treats the family like NPCs in a video game, dismissing their emotional reality because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging what's happening. He builds a robot to deliver waffles and apologies instead of apologizing himself. Diane sees through all of it. She tells him he's nothing like the husband she lost. The man she married was kind. This version of Rick is cruel, detached, hiding behind his genius to avoid feeling anything. The episode gives them time together anyway. Rick takes Diane to see the ducks, gives her a translator so she can understand what they're saying. The ducks, it turns out, mostly just curse at each other and talk about bread. It's anticlimactic. They laugh about it together. They go to a bar. They drink. They talk about Lost, comparing how their different universes' versions of the show ended. Diane asks if they're going to do robot roleplay, and for a moment, things feel almost normal. Then, Diane starts glitching, fading, dying. Rick realizes what's happening. Morty is trying to hog the hole, flooding it with his own fears so intensely that it's killing Rick. The fear entity is feeding on them both, and Morty's buffet of insecurities is overwhelming the system. The truth about Rick's fear becomes clear in this moment. He doesn't want to let Diane go. After all these years, after all the nihilism and detachment and claims that nothing matters, Rick still loves his dead wife. He still wants her back. And his greatest fear isn't losing her again, it's accepting happiness with her, because happiness always ends. The Hole's representative explains this to Morty in a separate conversation. Smart people know happiness is a trap. It can't last forever. Best case scenario, you die at the same time as the person you love. Worst case, you watch them go first through disease, through accident, through the slow erosion of incompatibility that turns lovers into strangers. Rick is terrified of happiness because he's smart enough to see through it. He knows the ending before the story starts, so he refuses to start the story at all. Diane, in the Hole, tells Rick to keep his fear, to stay afraid of letting her go, because if he doesn't fear it, he'll kill her again. He'll do what he always does, run, detach, abandon, and this time, he'll know exactly what he's destroying. Rick chooses to save Morty instead. He lets Diane go, again, because his grandson is dying in the real world, and someone has to make the hard choice. The escape from the Hole is its own ordeal, layers of false exits and recursive fears. Every time Rick and Morty think they're out, they realize they're still afraid of being certain and wrong, afraid of the Hole itself, afraid that the fear will never end. The resolution, such as it is, comes when they accept uncertainty. They stop needing to know if they're in the Hole. They stop being afraid of not knowing. The Hole, apparently, finds this boring enough to let them go. But the final twist reveals something darker. Rick never entered the Hole at all. He stood outside, waiting, while Morty faced his fears alone. The entire experience, Diane, the conversations, the choice to let her go happened only in Morty's fear space. Morty's deepest fear, it turns out, was that Rick wouldn't come after him. That if Morty jumped into a hole, Rick would just stand there and watch. Which is exactly what happened. Morty asks Rick if he's irreplaceable. Rick hedges, deflects, refuses to give a straight answer. Morty accepts this as confirmation that he's not, and somehow finds peace in that acceptance. The episode ends with them getting pancakes, the fear theoretically conquered, the relationship exactly as strained and complicated as it was before. Nothing is resolved. Everything is exactly the same, except now we know what Rick is afraid of. He's afraid of happiness. He's afraid of connection. He's afraid of letting himself want something, because wanting things means eventually losing them. And Rick has lost so much already that he's built his entire identity around never wanting anything again. The nihilism isn't philosophy, it's armor. Rick tells himself nothing matters because the alternative, admitting that some things matter desperately, that Diane mattered, that Beth matters, that Morty matters, is too painful to bear. If nothing matters, nothing can hurt you. If you never let yourself be happy, you never have to experience happiness ending. This is the fear that the Hole found delicious. Not spiders or death or cosmic horror. The fear of joy. The fear of peace. The fear of putting down your weapons and letting someone love you, knowing that love will eventually become loss. Rick Sanchez, the smartest man in the multiverse, is terrified of the thing that ordinary people experience every day, allowing themselves to be happy despite knowing it won't last. The episode doesn't let Rick conquer this fear. He doesn't emerge from the Hole transformed, ready to embrace connection and vulnerability. He emerges exactly as defended as he went in, maybe more so, because now he's seen what lurks beneath his defenses, and he's even more determined to keep them up. Morty emerges having learned that his greatest fear, Rick not caring enough to follow him, is probably accurate. Rick didn't jump in after him. Rick waited outside while Morty suffered alone. And yet Morty stays. Morty gets pancakes with the man who proved his worst fears correct. Morty continues the relationship, because what else is he going to do? Where else is he going to go? The Fear Hole episode is devastating because it confirms what we've suspected all along. Rick's detachment isn't strength, it's terror. He's not above caring, he's too afraid to care. Every joke, every dismissal, every claim that nothing matters is Rick running from the thing that scares him most: love, connection, the possibility of happiness. Rick would rather fight gods and topple governments than sit with the vulnerability of wanting something he might lose. He'd rather watch Morty suffer alone in a fear hole than jump in after him and risk having to feel something. That's the real Rick Sanchez. Not a god, not a genius beyond human weakness, just a scared old man who lost his wife and never recovered, who built walls so high he can't even see over them anymore, who would rather be alone forever than risk the pain of connection. The whole knows. The whole ate well that day. And Rick went back to pretending none of it happened, because that's what he always does, because the alternative is facing the fear he'll never conquer. Before we move on, just a small reminder to subscribe if you like the content. It's free and helps us keep improving these videos. Now, let's continue. Section 13. The Attempt, Part 2. Analyze Piss and Rick confronting his coping mechanisms. In Analyze Piss, the show gives us one of its dumbest premises and one of its most quietly devastating character moments, often in the same scene. The setup is aggressively silly. Rick is being harassed by a parade of joke villains: Cookie Magneto, Mr. Calypso, Mr. Stringbean, all of them pathetic enough that fighting them feels like punching down. Rick goes to Dr. Wong for advice, framing it as consultation rather than therapy because he still can't admit he needs help. She challenges him to ignore the villains for a week and see what happens. Then Pissmaster shows up. Pissmaster is exactly what he sounds like: a guy in a suit that shoots piss. He sprays the Smith family's lawn, makes a crude comment about summer, and gets his ass beaten by Jerry in one of the show's most cathartic sequences. Jerry becomes a viral sensation. Hashtag Flamingo Dad Trends. An intergalactic council of heroes offers Jerry membership. Everything is going great for Jerry, which means everything is going terribly for someone else. That someone else is Pissmaster. Rick, following Dr. Wong's advice, stays out of it. He watches Jerry get celebrated. He watches the family cheer. He watches Pissmaster become the internet's favorite punching bag. The video of his humiliation playing on loop across the galaxy. And then Rick goes to Pissmaster's apartment and finds him dead in the bathtub. The show doesn't linger on this discovery. It doesn't need to. Rick's face says everything: the recognition, the horror, the sudden weight of what ignoring the trolls actually means when the troll was a real person with real despair. Rick revives him, barely. The doorbell rings. It's Pissmaster's daughter. She's worried. She said terrible things about her father on her podcast. She's afraid he's going to hurt himself. She needs to know he's okay. Rick puts on the Pissmaster suit and answers the door. He tells her he's fine. He promises as Pissmaster to Pissmaster's daughter that if anything happens, it won't be her fault. It's his own choice. This is Rick Sanchez, the man who built a death ray and sat under it, telling a stranger's child that her father's suicide wouldn't be her responsibility. The parallel is impossible to miss. Rick knows exactly what this conversation feels like from the other side. Pissmaster dies anyway, off-screen, while Rick is wearing his suit. The note blames Jerry, specifically seeing everyone cheer as he got beaten made Pissmaster realize people just wanted to watch him fail. Rick makes a decision. He keeps wearing the suit. What follows is a montage of Rick, as Pissmaster, doing actual heroic acts, saving cats from trees, stopping purse snatchers, spraying piss on a volcano to save a town. He's rehabilitating Pissmaster's reputation, turning the galaxy's biggest joke into someone worth respecting. The plan is elaborate. Rick will plant a bomb on Orphan Island, a city populated entirely by orphans, because this show commits to its absurdity, then have the Pissmaster suit autopilot the bomb into space. Everyone will think Pissmaster sacrificed himself to save orphans. He dies a hero. His daughter gets to remember him as someone who mattered. Rick calls Dr. Wong to cancel his therapy session. He's good, he says. He put on the suit of his enemy, and he loves it. He's going to give this pathetic stranger a hero's death, a nice wet bow on top. Dr. Wong, surprisingly, approves. If it's free and fun, do it. It sounds healthy. Rick is doing something good without ulterior motive. He's helping someone who can never repay him, who will never even know he helped. There's no angle, no scheme, no way this benefits Rick Sanchez in any measurable way. This is growth. This is what therapy is supposed to produce. Of course, Jerry ruins it. The Intergalactic Council has noticed Pissmaster's rehabilitation and wants to offer him membership. They send Jerry to deliver the invitation and threaten to revoke Jerry's orb if he can't recruit Pissmaster. Jerry, desperate to keep his hero status, chases Rick across the sky while Rick is trying to execute the hero sacrifice plan. The bomb goes off. Rick's helmet gets knocked loose, revealing his identity. The whole family finds out. Jerry finds the suicide note. And here's where the episode gets complicated. Rick initially lies. He claims he was Pissmaster the whole time, that the villain who harassed the family was actually Rick in disguise, that Jerry's viral moment was orchestrated to boost Jerry's confidence. The family believes it. They're proud of Rick for doing something nice. But Rick can't leave it alone. He pulls Morty aside and tells him the truth. Jerry's beating actually did cause Pissmaster to kill himself. Rick found the body. He's been carrying the suicide note around. Morty immediately tells the family. Rick acts surprised, but he's not. He showed Morty the note, knowing exactly what would happen. He couldn't sit on the secret. He couldn't let Jerry's moment of triumph stand uncomplicated. He had to make sure everyone knew the cost. This is the tension at the heart of Rick's character. He's capable of genuine kindness. The Pissmaster rehabilitation proves that. He can do good things for no reward. He can help people who can't help him back. The capacity is there, but he can't let himself be seen as good. He can't let the story end with him as the hero. Something in Rick needs to undercut his own positive actions, to reveal the dark truth underneath, to make sure nobody, including himself, gets to believe he's actually a decent person. Dr. Wong would probably have something to say about this pattern. Rick has scheduled exactly 0 follow-up appointments. The episode's emotional core isn't really about Pissmaster, though his story is genuinely affecting. It's about Rick recognizing himself in someone else's despair and being unable to look away. Rick has been where Pissmaster was. The garage scene in Season 2 established that definitively. Rick knows what it feels like to build a device designed to end your life, to sit under it, to be ready for everything to stop. The difference is that Rick survived through luck, through passing out, through whatever mechanism prevented the beam from firing. Pissmaster didn't survive. Pissmaster went through with it. And the thing that pushed him over the edge was public humiliation, people laughing at him, the universal agreement that he was a joke not worth taking seriously. Rick has spent years cultivating exactly that response to his own villains. Don't engage. Don't give them the satisfaction. Let them embarrass themselves until they go away. Dr. Wong's advice, ignore them for a week, is standard wisdom for dealing with trolls and attention seekers. But Pissmaster wasn't a troll. Pissmaster was a person, with a daughter, with a history, with whatever pain drove him to strap on a piss suit and seek validation through conflict, and treating him like a joke killed him. Rick can't escape the parallel. Every time he dismisses a pathetic villain, every time he refuses to engage with someone seeking his attention, he's potentially contributing to someone's spiral. The power differential between Rick and his enemies is so vast that his indifference is itself a form of violence. This doesn't mean Rick should fight every Cookie Magneto who shows up. The episode makes clear that engaging with trolls creates its own problems. But it also makes clear that the trolls are people, that their pathetic attempts at villainy often mask genuine suffering, that the correct response to human pain isn't always strategic disengagement. Rick chose to help Pissmaster posthumously. He could have walked away, let the suicide stand, let the family never know, let Jerry's triumph remain uncomplicated. Instead, he spent days rehabilitating a dead man's reputation, planning an elaborate fake sacrifice, trying to give meaning to a life that ended in despair. That's empathy. That's Rick recognizing something of himself in a stranger and choosing to honor it rather than mock it. That's growth. And then he undercut it by revealing the truth, making sure Jerry's moment was poisoned, ensuring that nobody got to feel purely good about anything that happened. That's also Rick. The two impulses coexist, constantly wrestling for dominance. He's capable of profound kindness and compulsive self-sabotage. He can do the right thing and immediately do something to negate it. He can help someone without ulterior motive and then create an ulterior motive retroactively, just so he doesn't have to think of himself as generous. The episode ends with the family arguing about who's responsible for Pissmaster's death. Jerry feels guilty but defensive. Summer and Beth blame Jerry, but also blame Rick for keeping the note. Morty blames Rick for showing him the note in the first place. Rick shrugs it off, retreating into his usual detachment. Nothing is resolved. The therapy that Dr. Wong prescribed is abandoned. The growth Rick demonstrated is immediately undermined by his need to spread the guilt around. But something did happen. Rick spent days in a piss suit, saving strangers, rehabilitating a dead man's legacy. He did it because he recognized Pissmaster's pain as real, as valid, as deserving of response. He did it because he saw himself in that bathtub. Maybe that's all we can expect from Rick Sanchez. Not sustained change, not permanent growth, but moments, brief windows where his defenses drop and his capacity for connection breaks through. The moments don't last. The walls go back up. The pattern reasserts itself. But the moments are real. They prove something exists beneath the cynicism, beneath the detachment, beneath the claims that nothing matters. Rick cared about Pissmaster. Rick tried to help. Rick did help, in his broken, self-sabotaging way. The next time Rick encounters someone spiraling, the next pathetic villain, the next cry for attention disguised as aggression, maybe he'll remember Pissmaster. Maybe he'll look a little closer before dismissing them. Maybe he won't. But for one episode, Rick Sanchez confronted the consequences of his indifference and chose empathy. That has to count for something, even if he immediately made sure it didn't count for too much. Section 14, The Connection, Unmortrican, and Facing the Man Who Started Everything. In Unmortrican, the show finally delivers the confrontation it's been building towards since Season 1. Rick versus Rick Prime. The grieving husband versus the monster who made him that way. The man who lost everything versus the man who took it. It should feel triumphant. It doesn't. The episode opens with Rick doing something unusual, leaving the house. Morty notes that it's good to see him outside the sub-basement, even if he never actually kills the version of himself who murdered his wife. Rick has been hunting Rick Prime obsessively, using technology that merges dimensions to flush out his target. It's not working particularly well, but the effort itself seems therapeutic. Then Evil Morty shows up. Evil Morty, last seen escaping through the central finite curve into universes unknown, has been pulled back by the shockwaves from Rick's dimension-merging technique. He's annoyed. He didn't want to be here. He certainly didn't want to help Rick with anything. But he can't resist improving Rick's methods. What follows is a reluctant collaboration between two beings who despise each other but share a common enemy. Rick and Evil Morty bicker constantly about technique, about ego, about who's actually smarter, while their combined efforts finally succeed in locating Rick Prime. Rick Prime has been waiting. He's built traps specifically for Ricks who hunt him. An automated system captures Rick, Evil Morty, Morty, and several other revenge-seeking Ricks, depositing them in a death arena where they're forced to fight each other. The prize, Rick Prime claims, is getting your Diane back. Rick immediately knows it's a lie. He screams at the other Ricks that Rick Prime can't bring anyone back if he could. The weapon he used wouldn't have been worth building, but desperation makes people stupid, and Ricks start killing each other anyway. The trap reveals something important about Rick Prime's philosophy. He erased her from every universe across infinity. Every version of Diane, everywhere, gone. The Omega device removes someone from existence entirely. Why would Rick Prime do this? The recorded message in the trap explains, if you want to see the Rick that ruined your life, look around. Rick Prime blames his victims for their own suffering. He killed Diane because Ricks kept coming after him, and eliminating her eliminated the motivation. It's victim blaming at cosmic scale. Rick Prime is what happens when you take Rick's intelligence and remove every last shred of attachment. He's not just evil, he's empty. He doesn't care about anything, including himself. He built the Omega device not because he feared death, but because he found the concept interesting. He's been alive so long, with so much power, that nothing means anything to him anymore. He's Rick without the broken connections. Rick without Morty. Rick without the garage scene and the suicide attempt and the desperate clinging to family despite claiming family doesn't matter. Rick Prime is Rick's nihilism taken to its logical conclusion, and it's horrifying. The confrontation, when it finally happens, is everything and nothing at the same time. Rick and Evil Morty escape the trap together. Using complementary skills, Rick's determination and evil Morty's technical brilliance to do what no other Rick has managed, they track Rick Prime to his base, a massive facility built in the space beyond the central finite curve. The fight is brutal. Rick Prime has advantages our Rick doesn't. More free time to prepare, no emotional attachments to distract him, the Omega device ready to erase anyone who threatens him. He kills Uncle Slow Mobius, from way back when, transformed into family through Beth's marriage just to hurt Rick, just because he can. Rick screams that he'll kill him. Rick Prime laughs. Evil Morty, meanwhile, is doing what evil Morty does, being the smartest person in the room while everyone else gets distracted by emotion. He's not here for revenge. He's here for the weapon schematics. He downloads everything he needs while Rick and Rick Prime beat each other bloody. The killing blow comes from both of them. Evil Morty disables Rick Prime's defenses. Rick delivers the final strikes. It's not elegant. It's not satisfying. It's just violence until one of them stops moving. Rick Prime's last words are telling. Admit it. You would have been me. I just walked into your garage before you walked into mine. He's not entirely wrong. Rick C-137 and Rick Prime started from the same place. Both invented portal technology independently. Both had the same capabilities. Both faced the same choice about what to do with infinite power. The difference is that Rick Prime never had anyone to lose, so he never had anything to anchor him. Our Rick lost Diane and Beth. That loss broke him, but it also saved him from becoming what Rick Prime became. The grief was an anchor. The pain was proof that he cared about something. Rick Prime cared about nothing. Rick Prime was free, in the way Rick sometimes claims to want no attachments, no vulnerabilities, no weaknesses, and Rick Prime was a monster. After the killing, evil Morty asks the question that matters. How's it feel? Better? No? Exactly the same? Rick doesn't answer. He doesn't have to. The question is rhetorical. Evil Morty knows that revenge doesn't heal anything, that killing Rick Prime won't bring Diane back, that decades of hunting end in the same emptiness they started with. The episode's final sequence plays Look On Down from the Bridge, the same Mazzy Star song from the ending of Rick Potion #9 and the suicide attempt in autoerotic assimilation. The show is being deliberate here. This is the same emotional territory. Rick has achieved his goal, and he feels nothing. We see Slow Mobius's family, his wife and daughter, forgetting he ever existed because the Omega device erased him from reality. We see Rick sitting in silence, covered in his enemy's blood, having accomplished the thing he's been working toward for decades. The victory is hollow because victory was never the point. Rick didn't hunt Rick Prime because killing him would make things better. He hunted Rick Prime because the hunting gave him something to do, a purpose beyond drinking himself to death, a reason to keep existing. Now that reason is gone. Evil Morty leaves with a warning. He has the Omega device schematics now. He could end the Rick experiment anytime he wants, wipe out every Rick across every dimension. He's choosing not to, partly because using a weapon like that paints a target on your back, partly because he's not interested in revenge. Evil Morty is, arguably, the healthiest character in this episode. He wanted something specific, the weapon plans, and he got it. He didn't let emotion cloud his judgment. He didn't get distracted by the satisfaction of hurting Rick Prime personally. He just did the job and left. Our Rick couldn't do that. Our Rick had to be there for the kill, had to deliver the final blows himself, had to look his wife's murderer in the eyes as he died. The emotional need was the point, and the emotional need wasn't satisfied by the killing. This is what the show has been building to for years. The demonstration that Rick's pursuit of revenge was never going to heal him. The trauma isn't located in Rick Prime, it's located in Rick. Killing the external source doesn't remove the internal wound. Morty, watching all this, asks if Rick is okay. Rick says yes. He's lying, obviously, but what else is he going to say? The question Evil Morty raised earlier haunts the ending. What happens now? Rick has defined himself by this hunt for so long that its conclusion leaves a void. He's not suicidal in the way he was in Season 2. He's proven he cares about living by fighting so hard to accomplish this goal, but he's also lost the thing that was keeping him moving. What does Rick Sanchez do when the revenge is complete and nothing feels better? The show doesn't answer that question in this episode. It lets the emptiness sit there, uncomfortable and unresolved. Rick got what he wanted, and discovered that wanting it was all he really had. Rick Prime was right about one thing. Our Rick could have become him. The potential was always there. The same intelligence, the same capability, the same access to infinite power. What separated them was loss, the loss that broke Rick, but also made him human, that gave him something to care about even when caring hurt. Rick Prime never had that. Rick Prime never lost anyone, because Rick Prime never loved anyone. He was free, in the worst possible sense of the word. Our Rick killed him and felt nothing, because there was nothing to feel. The man who ruined his life is dead. The wife who made his life worth living is still gone. The daughter he's living with is still a replacement for the one he lost. Nothing has changed except Rick no longer has someone to blame. Unmortrican is the show admitting that the revenge narrative was always a red herring. We wanted Rick to kill Rick Prime. We wanted closure. We wanted the catharsis of seeing the bad guy punished. The show gave us exactly what we wanted and made sure we understood how meaningless it was. Rick Sanchez is not defined by his enemies. He's defined by his grief, his choices, his relationships, his refusal to fully commit to either connection or isolation. Killing Rick Prime doesn't change any of that. The hunt is over. The hollowness remains. And somewhere out there, evil Morty has the plans for a weapon that can erase anyone from existence across all dimensions. But that's a problem for another episode. Right now, Rick is sitting in his ship, covered in blood that doesn't belong to him, having accomplished everything he set out to do. It feels exactly the same as before. It always does. Section 15. Conclusion. The smartest man alive still can't solve himself. And maybe that's the point. So here we are. 2 hours, 15 sections. Approximately 25,000 words about a cartoon scientist and his infinite capacity for self-destruction. If you're still reading this, it's probably some ungodly hour of the morning, and you have work tomorrow, and you're making choices your future self will question. Welcome to the club. Rick would be proud. Actually, Rick would mock you for caring this much about a TV show, which is itself a defense mechanism we've discussed at length, so you're equipped to recognize it now. Growth. Let's talk about what we just did. We traced Rick Sanchez from his origin, the death of Diane and Beth, the failed revenge tour, the construction of a prison made of universes through his abandonment of realities, his suicide attempt, his relationship with Unity, his pathological avoidance of therapy, his cruelty toward Morty, his inability to let Beth know if she's real, his confrontation with evil Morty, his fear of happiness, and finally, his hollow victory over Rick Prime. It's a lot. It's too much, honestly. No one person should carry this much narrative weight, which is probably why Rick drinks. The question that remains is, why does any of this matter? Why did you just spend 2 hours reading about a fictional character's trauma when you could have been sleeping, or working, or engaging in literally any activity that doesn't involve parasocial psychoanalysis of an animated alcoholic? Here's my theory. Rick Sanchez matters because he's the nightmare version of something we all fear. Not the adventures, not the aliens, not the portal gun or the Citadel or the central finite curve. Those are window dressing, entertaining as hell, but ultimately just the vehicle for the real horror. The real horror is this. Intelligence doesn't lead to happiness. Rick is the smartest man in infinite universes. He can solve any problem, build any device, defeat any enemy, escape any consequence. He has capabilities that would make gods jealous, and he is profoundly, catastrophically miserable. That's terrifying in a way that no monster of the week could ever be, because we're taught explicitly and implicitly throughout our entire lives that competence leads to success, that success leads to fulfillment, that if we're just smart enough and capable enough and work hard enough, we'll eventually arrive at a place where things feel okay. Rick Sanchez is proof that the equation doesn't balance. You can be the most important person in the room in every room, in infinite rooms across infinite realities, and still feel empty. You can solve every external problem and remain fundamentally broken. You can have everything and want nothing except the one thing you can't have. Rick can't solve himself. That's the thesis. That's what every episode we discussed comes back to, in one way or another. He can't solve himself because solving himself would require the one thing his intelligence can't provide: vulnerability, consistency. The boring, unsexy, day after day work of showing up for people without any guarantee of reward. Dr. Wong nailed it in Pickle Rick. The thing about repairing, maintaining, and cleaning is it's not an adventure. There's no way to do it so wrong you might die. It's just work. Some people are okay going to work. Some people would rather die. Rick would rather fight gods. Rick would rather turn himself into a pickle and battle his way through a sewer full of rats. Rick would rather hunt his wife's killer across infinite dimensions for decades than sit in a room and talk about his feelings for an hour. Because therapy requires admitting you need help. It requires showing up week after week, doing the exercises, processing the trauma, making incremental progress that doesn't feel like progress at all. It requires trusting someone else with your inner life. Rick trusts no one. Rick has been betrayed by himself so many times by other Ricks, by his own choices, by the fundamental loneliness of being the smartest person anywhere that trusting anyone feels like tactical suicide. So he stays broken, he stays miserable, he stays brilliant and powerful and utterly alone, surrounded by family he can't fully connect with, haunted by a wife he can't bring back, defined by grief he refuses to process. And we watch. For 7 seasons and counting, we watch Rick Sanchez make the same mistakes in increasingly elaborate configurations. We watch him hurt Morty and apologize and hurt him again. We watch him push away everyone who loves him and then act surprised when they're not there. We watch him claim nothing matters while obviously caring desperately about very specific things. We watch because we recognize something. Not everyone watching Rick and Morty is a genius. Not everyone has portal guns or dead wives or infinite versions of themselves scattered across the multiverse. But almost everyone has experienced some version of Rick's central problem, the gap between knowing what you should do and actually doing it. You know you should go to therapy. You know you should call your family more. You know you should stop drinking so much, exercise regularly, maintain your relationships, do the boring work of keeping your life functional. You know all of this, and sometimes you don't do it anyway. Sometimes the idea of sitting with your feelings is so overwhelming that you'd rather do literally anything else. Sometimes the adventure is more appealing than the maintenance. Sometimes running feels easier than staying. Rick Sanchez is that impulse given infinite power and zero accountability. He's what happens when you can always escape, always find a new universe, always avoid consequences through sheer capability. He's the dark fantasy of never having to deal with your shit because you're smart enough to outrun it. Except he's not outrunning it. That's the trick the show keeps pulling. Rick looks like he's winning. He defeats the enemies, survives the adventures, maintains his position as the most important person in any room, but he's not winning. He's just postponing the reckoning. The reckoning comes anyway. It came in the garage with the death ray. It came with Unity's letter. It comes every time Rick looks at Beth and doesn't know if she's real. Every time Morty flinches from him. Every time the family reforms around his absence because they've learned not to count on him. Rick Sanchez is a tragedy dressed up as a comedy. The jokes are good, genuinely funny, often brilliant, but they're also a coping mechanism. For Rick, for the show, for us, we laugh because the alternative is sitting with how deeply sad this all is. A man lost his wife and daughter. He spent decades trying to avenge them, failed, and eventually gave up. He moved into a house with a version of his daughter who doesn't know he's not her real father. He drags her son on adventures that regularly traumatize the kid. He claims nothing matters, while obviously caring so much that it's destroying him. That's not funny. That's devastating. But it's also, somehow, compelling. We keep watching. We keep caring about Rick even when he's cruel, even when he's wrong, even when he does things that should make us hate him. Because underneath the asshole exterior is someone who wants to be better and can't figure out how. That's the most human thing about him. Not the intelligence, not the capability, not the cool gadgets, or the adventure lifestyle. The humanity is in the failure. The repeated, consistent, heartbreaking failure to change despite knowing exactly what needs to change. Rick could fix himself. He has the intelligence. He has the resources. He has people who love him despite everything. The path is clear. Show up consistently. Be vulnerable. Do the work. Accept that healing is boring and slow and doesn't come with any dramatic payoffs. He won't do it. He can see the solution and he won't implement it because implementing it requires becoming someone other than who he's been. It requires admitting that the persona he's built, the nihilist, the drunk, the genius who doesn't need anyone, was always a defense mechanism. It requires grieving Diane properly, instead of using her death as an excuse. The smartest thing Rick Sanchez could do is go to therapy consistently. The most human thing about him is that he won't. And maybe that's the point. Maybe Rick and Morty isn't trying to show us a character who overcomes his trauma and achieves happiness. Maybe it's showing us what happens when someone refuses to do the work, when capability becomes a prison rather than a liberation, when intelligence is used to justify avoidance rather than enable growth. Maybe Rick is a cautionary tale. Or maybe he's just honest about something most stories won't admit. That some people never change. That some wounds never heal. That you can understand your problems perfectly and still be unable to solve them. If you've made it this far, if you're still awake, still reading, still invested in the psychological architecture of a cartoon character, maybe Rick's story hits because we all have a little bit of that avoidance in us. The part that would rather do anything dramatic than something boring but necessary. The part that knows what we should do and chooses not to do it. Rick Sanchez is that part. Given a portal gun and infinite runtime, he's never going to be okay. The show has made that clear by now. He'll have moments of connection, moments of growth, moments where he almost breaks through, and then he'll retreat back into the familiar patterns because the patterns are comfortable and change is terrifying. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe for more like this. It's free, it helps the channel a lot, and we'll see you in the next one.